Chapter 2140. Michael's words made everyone gradually quiet down. They were all races that had survived the racial war 100 years ago. They were all aware of the importance of an outstanding commander and tactical cooperation. Back then, the elves had almost lost the entire forest, but they managed to chase the orcs and demons out of the forest under the command of Helena and the Elven Queen. They relied on their powerful charisma and outstanding commanding ability. And some time ago, the Roth Empire's 100,000-strong northwestern cavalry charged straight into the Twilight Forest and split into 3 groups to tear the entire forest apart. They were unstoppable and unstoppable, which further proved the importance of tactical cooperation and commanding ability. One had to know that the orcs were not weak. However, the tribes that were fighting for themselves could not form a powerful combat force at all. They could only be crushed mercilessly. Douglas nodded and said, "I agree. The current situation concerns the safety of the Norland continent. If we only care about personal gains and losses and the interests of a certain race, the final result will only be a crushing defeat. We dwarves agree too. There's no point in fighting a battle without any rules," the king of dwarves said loudly. The goblins have no objections. "Let's vote and choose a person that everyone agrees with to be the commander," the chief of the goblins said. "If that's the case, how should we choose the person?" Helena asked. Everyone also looked at Michael. Michael looked at everyone and said, "Everyone here is a person of virtue and prestige from the various races. You are also the best powerhouses and wise people on the Norland continent. All of you are qualified to participate in the election. This battle concerns the survival of the Norland continent. It's touching that all the races are willing to step forward at this time. The choice of the commander is extremely important. I hope that someone with the ability can step forward to take on this responsibility and become a candidate. Every race here has the right to vote. The candidate with the most votes will become the commander that everyone agrees with." The rules were simple, and the candidates were honest. Everyone present had the right to participate in the election. Based on the principle of voluntary participation, all the races would vote together to choose the final commander. The person with the most votes would become the commander, and everyone would agree with that. This method of choosing the commander made all the representatives nod their heads in agreement. At this time, it was naturally not suitable for the Dance Forest Assembly to choose an alliance leader. Since that's the case, I won't stand on ceremony. Our Abyssal Demon clan has rich combat experience. Whether it's the racial war back then or the various large and small battles over the years, I've commanded no less than 100 battles. If you choose me as the commander, I'm naturally the most suitable one," the Abyssal Demon clan patriarch said confidently as he stood up with a smile. Is it because you didn't lose miserably enough in the Wind Forest back then?" Helena laughed disdainfully. "You can't even defeat a flaming devil tribe. If we expect you to fight against the devils, isn't that the same as using the elites of various races to fill an ice cave?" Irina sneered. Back then, the Abyss Demon clan had committed all sorts of crimes in the Wind Forest. Now, he still dared to show off and use it as capital. Naturally, the two of them couldn't stand it anymore. You. The Abyssal Demon's face flushed red. He couldn't utter a single word for a long time. He angrily sat down. The Flaming Devil clan patriarch, who was sitting at the side, originally wanted to show off, but he didn't expect to be implicated before he could even stand up. He clenched his fists and pressed himself back into his seat. And this setback from the Abyssal Demon clan patriarch also calmed down the demons who were originally itching to make a move. They couldn't even convince the Fiend race's members, let alone convince the other races in such an occasion. "Uncle, aren't you going to try?" Camilla whispered to Dracula. Dracula shook his head and sighed. "Although I know my charm is limitless, I haven't even commanded a battle of 1,000 people. I really don't know how to fight a battle of 1 million people. Camilla pursed her lips. I'm just saying. Maybe you can't even get a vote from the demons. I believe your words, too. Dracula nodded honestly. If the demons could be unified, they would be more powerful than the orcs. It was a pity that they were scattered. After a moment of silence, Lewis stood up and said to everyone, "Count me in. We, the giant dragons, have a strong ability to control the situation." In the racial war back then, the Golden Dragon clan could be considered to have many achievements. Lewis was a powerhouse who had been famous for a long time, and the giant dragons were very powerful. Lewis could indeed convince the others easily. Andre nodded slightly at Dominic, who was beside him. Dominic stood up and said, "I am Dominic, the Marshal of the Roth Empire. I have commanded 1 million cavalrymen of the Roth Empire. Whether it is tactical arrangements or army management, I have decades of experience. This is destined to be a high-intensity war. The cooperation between the various races is very important. I think I can be a good commander." Everyone present couldn't help but take a few more glances at Dominic. Just like what Dominic said, he was the only one present who had truly managed 1 million cavalrymen. Although Dominic wasn't the one who commanded the Northwestern Army's war against the orcs, it was said that Dominic was the one who came up with the attack plan. The Northwestern Army only had to follow the plan, and they almost conquered the Twilight Forest. Humans were indeed better at using tactics than other races. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy for humans to survive on the Norland continent with their weak bodies and weak individual abilities. Helena stood up and calmly said, "During the war among species, I once led the elves to win against the strong, and chased the orcs and demons out of the Wind Forest. I created many miracles in war. I think I can lead this war well." Everyone was a little surprised that Helena would participate in the election. However, what she said was true. The elves had turned the tables in the war among species. The two powerful races, the orcs and demons, were beaten into the background. And Helena, as the high priestess of the elves, had indeed played a crucial role. With people participating in the election one after another, everyone's gaze finally landed on Alex. "Will he participate?" Connie whispered. "Perhaps. Actually, no one is more suitable than him," Rex said to Meg. Dexter was also looking at Meg with anticipation in his eyes. Meg stood up and calmly said, "I will participate." It was simple and clear. "I think no one knows the devils and the undead army better than me, and how to deal with them," Meg continued. It was a straightforward and irrefutable reason. Looking at the expressions of the various races' representatives, Meg knew he had one. Chapter 2141. Everyone present looked at Meg. No one could think of a rebuttal to Meg. Who was this? A man who attracted the lightning tribulation to suppress the devil on his own, and successfully stalled for time to seal the devil when everyone was about to give up. The whistleblower for the undead army incident this time. The promoter of world peace. And the undisputed #1 powerhouse on the Norland continent. Then, he participated in the election. A smile appeared on Dexter's face. His vote was naturally for Lord Alex. Irina looked up at Meg with a smile on her face. He was indeed her man. He was so handsome when he stood up for her. There shouldn't be any suspense now. Camilla looked at Meg and shrugged. Unless I participate, there won't be any suspense. Dracula nodded. Connie glanced at Rex. You are the chief. This decision should be made by you, Rex said with a smile. Connie nodded. He already had a decision in his heart. After Meg participated in the election, no one stood up to express their intention to participate. Is there anyone else who wants to participate? Michael asked everyone. No one spoke. All right. Now, we will use the few who expressed their intention to participate as candidates. All races will vote. The one with the highest number of votes will become the supreme commander of the Allied army. Michael said loudly. Everyone, do you have any objections? Dracula raised his hand and asked seriously, I have a question. We demons can't reach an agreement internally. How should this vote be counted? Michael pondered for a moment, and said, why don't you all vote among the 10 races first, and then the one with the highest number of votes will be the demon's choice. If you're a brother, vote for me, the Abyss Demon Chief said as he patted his chest. Alex. The Flaming Demon Chief was the first to express his opinion. Alex. Dracula expressed his opinion on behalf of the vampires. Alex. In the end, Alex defeated the Abyssal Demon Patriarch with a 9-1 margin and won the first vote. None of them are reliable. The Abyssal Demon Patriarch's face darkened. This was a great loss of face. The other races chose to vote anonymously. The staff handed out voting papers, and the representatives of each race wrote down their preferences on the paper before submitting them to Michael. Chaos City, the giant dragons, the Roth Empire, the orcs, the elves, the goblins, the dwarves, the Lantist, and the trolls had a total of 9 votes. In addition to the vote that the demons had already cast, the one with the highest number of votes would become the supreme commander of the Allied army. The representatives of the various races stared at the crystal box in front of Michael. There was no chance of it being fake. Of course, Michael would not play such tricks in front of a group of 10th-tier powerhouses. Now that all the votes are in my hands, I will open the votes on the spot and count the votes directly. Michael opened his arms and gestured to everyone before reaching into the box to take out the first vote. He then opened it and looked at everyone. Dominic. Michael read out the name on the vote. The representatives of the various races looked solemn as they waited for the results to be announced. Michael then took out the second vote. Helena. Michael read out the name of the second vote. Dominic. The third vote was still Dominic's. Yo. Many people looked at Dominic. It seemed like there were still people who trusted this experienced marshal. Meg also glanced at Dominic. From a technical point of view, Dominic was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate to be the commander of the Allied army. However, this war was different from any other war between the Roth Empire and any other race in the past. He had to be the supreme commander in order to control the situation. Cthulhu could not be killed. He could only reseal it. Fighting against the undead army was not the goal. Resealing Cthulhu would remove the threat of the undead army automatically. Of course, with Cthulhu's slyness and unstoppable power, the Allied army would have to pay a huge price to stop the invasion of the undead army. Andre's eyes also lit up. It would be best if Dominic could become the commander of the Allied army. Alex. Michael took out the fourth vote and read out the name on it. 2 people, 2 votes. It seemed like there was still some suspense. The representatives of the various races looked thoughtful as they started to think about what would happen if these 2 people became the commander of the Allied army. Michael took out the 6th vote. Alex. 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 The votes that only had Alex's name on them killed all suspense in the end. Alex received 7 votes and became the commander of the Allied army with an absolute advantage. This was a world that worshipped power after all. Moreover, compared to Dominic, who was loyal to the Roth Empire, Alex, who had betrayed the Roth Empire, was indeed a more reassuring choice. Moreover, just as Alex said, no one in this world knew the devil better than he did. He was the only man who could compete with the devil. He was also the only one who could retreat safely from the devil's hands time and time again. Alex was also born in the military. He was the commander of the Northwest Army back then, and was once seen as the successor of the Roth Empire's marshal. Alex received 7 votes. He will become the highest commander of the Allied army, Michael announced loudly. As expected of him. Camilla looked at Meg, and couldn't help but praise him. Almost everyone trusts him. He's too impressive. Connie looked at Meg with admiration. The representatives of the various races also congratulated him. Meg stood up, and said to everyone, "Thank you for your trust. I hope we can trust each other in the future and cooperate seamlessly to destroy the devil and the undead army together. Don't worry. I can guarantee that the giant dragons will carry out your orders." Lewis laughed heartily. Dexter stood up and respectfully said, "Lantist is loyal to you." Connie stood up, and also respectfully said, "The orcs are willing to follow your orders. The Roth Empire respects the choice of the various races. We will listen to your orders." Andre also made his stance clear. The centralization of power was smoother than Meg had expected. Meg looked at everyone solemnly and said, "This is a war that is destined to be difficult. It requires great courage and wisdom. Therefore, I hope that Marshal Dominic can be my deputy. He has very rich commanding experience and tactical deduction ability. He is an outstanding strategist." Everyone looked at Dominic. Dominic stood up and cupped his fists at Meg. "I will do my best." Chapter 2142. After the new peace agreement was signed, Meg became the commander of the Alliance army with an absolute advantage. According to the agreement between the various races, the Alliance army signed an agreement that included the exact number of troops each race would send out, as well as some details about logistics. Dominic, who had been the commander of the 3 armies for decades, was much more experienced than Meg in this aspect, so he easily passed the responsibility to Dominic. Meanwhile, he met with the Moon Nation's formation masters, Jonas and Barbara, alone. The key to this war was how to reseal Cthulhu, so the sealing formation became extremely important. This time, there was no half-broken formation left for you to repair. They couldn't even determine Cthulhu's location, and couldn't make it wait somewhere for you to seal it. In the face of absolute power, many plans became pale and powerless. Jonas looked at the 3 points that Meg had drawn on the map, and thought for a while. He said seriously, "I need to go to the scene to determine which position is the most suitable for setting up the formation. According to your estimation of the attack time, we can only complete the setting up of 1 formation." "All right, I'll get Michael to send someone to bring you there." Meg nodded. I'm sleepy." "Master, take your time. I still have something to do, so I won't accompany you." Barbara looked outside a few times absent-mindedly, but she couldn't sit still in the end. She got up to say goodbye, and then slipped away. "Her Highness might be busy," Jonas explained a little embarrassedly. "Young people are all like that." Meg smiled. He knew what Barbara was in a hurry to do. The alliance had been formed, but there were many disputes between the various races. For example, the route the Alliance army would take when passing through each race's territory, the logistical supplies along the way, and so on. Although Meg was the chief commander, he didn't intend to take care of everything, no matter how big or small. Therefore, he left early with Irina. "Master, I'll leave these matters to you guys. I'm going back to sleep and have a meal," Connie said to Rex after yawning, and then left in a flash. "Uncle, you can go back by yourself later. I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first," Camilla said to Dracula, and also slipped away. Sigh. "Wait a minute." Dracula looked at Camilla, who had disappeared through the door, and raised his eyebrows. "This lass, didn't I choose you as the clan leader to do these things? TSK, TSK, TSK. Our little Connie has become the queen of the Twilight Forest." Camilla said with a smile as she walked out of the city lord's manor and looked at Connie, who was swinging her legs on the stone lion in front of the door. Ho ho, that's right. I thought I would be the first to ascend to the throne as the queen of the Moon Nation, but now it seems that both of you are faster than me, Barbara said with a smile as she looked at the two of them. Actually, I only wanted to be an assassin in the beginning. Connie looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle and sighed softly. All right, don't fill the cup. Camilla patted Connie's head and said with a smile, we haven't had dinner yet. The most important thing now is to fill our stomachs. Gurgle, Connie's stomach growled in tandem. Yes. I'm starving. Let's go back to the restaurant now. Connie nodded in agreement while rubbing her stomach. Then, she walked forward quickly. The restaurant is this way. Barbara quickly grabbed her and dragged her in the opposite direction. She sighed and said, you're only fit to be a queen like this. Let go of me. I know the way. Connie tried to struggle. Speaking of which, how did you kill Oster with your sense of direction? Although he lost an arm, he was still a level 10 powerhouse after all, Camilla asked curiously as she looked at Connie who was being held back. There were many legends about Connie killing Oster in the pugilistic world. That was because it symbolized the change of power in the Twilight Forest, and also meant that Connie had replaced Oster. However, more people suspected that Oster didn't die in the hands of Connie, but in the hands of Lex. However, Lex gave the credit to Connie so that she could secure her position. Even Camilla and the rest who were familiar with Connie were curious about this. After all, Connie was a person with no sense of direction who could even get lost while delivering food. Asking her to be an assassin who could jump 2 grades to kill a level 10 powerhouse did sound very magical. Just sneaking into the August tribe and finding Oster's bedroom was a huge challenge for her. Or rather, it was an impossible mission. Wow, you don't believe in your sister's abilities. Connie looked at the two of them with an aggrieved and hurt expression. It's not that we don't believe. Barbara shook her head and said seriously, it's just that we can't believe it. Camilla nodded with a smile too. All right. Although I didn't find his room by myself, I did kill him. I used 3 swords when he was asleep. Connie gestured with 3 fingers. Impressive, right? You really killed him. Barbara looked at Connie in shock. Although she was a level 8 spatial mage, she never thought that someone could jump 2 grades and kill a level 10 powerhouse. Please call me an assassin. Connie lifted her head and revealed a proud chin. Impressive. Camilla gave her a thumbs up. She already believed her. In official battles, it was extremely rare to succeed in a level-skipping challenge. But if it was an assassination, it was a different story. Even a level 10 powerhouse couldn't maintain a vigilant and defensive state all the time. And an assassin would find the moment when you were the most relaxed to give you a full blow and end the battle. For example, a mage could be killed by an ordinary human with a sharp blade in his sleep. Connie, who was the disciple of the hairless monk, had trained her assassination skills. It was reasonable for her to succeed in assassinating Oster in his sleep. Cool. Barbara's eyes lit up, and she looked at Connie expectantly. Why don't you teach me how to be an assassin too? Connie glanced at Barbara and shook her head. You can't. Why can't I? Barbara puffed out her chest and said defiantly, I'm a famous young genius in the Moon Nation. But you're a mage. You exposed yourself the moment you took out your magic wand. You might be killed before you could even complete a set of incantations. How can you be an assassin? Connie patted her flat chest and suggested, why don't you learn close combat magic from little Amy first? No. Barbara moved her hand away and shook her head in refusal. It wasn't that she didn't want to learn, she was just too embarrassed to ask. Connie continued, think about it. If you learn melee magic, combined with your spatial magic, you'll definitely be the best among assassins. You'll be able to appear anywhere without any warning, and have the ability to attack instantly. Chapter 2143. High Priestess, I'm a little tired. I want to go back and rest, Sally said softly beside Helena. Helena looked at her for a while before nodding. Go ahead. Sally got up and left the bustling meeting hall before leaving the city lord's castle. Walking in the cold wind of the winter night, there were no pedestrians on the road, and the long streets seemed rather lonely. It was a familiar, yet unfamiliar city. That day, she mustered up her courage to leave the forest and come all the way to this city. She originally had the heart to travel the continent, but she eventually stopped at a small restaurant. Now that she thought about it, it seemed that she only lived for herself during that period of time in her life. I wonder, are they doing well? Sally looked toward the south of the city with hesitation on her face. After a long time, she still walked toward the south. Meg returned to the restaurant early and prepared all kinds of ingredients. Not long after, the ladies came one after another. Uncle Meg. Anna ran into the restaurant and jumped into Meg's arms. Meg carried the little one and spun 2 rounds. He looked at Anna, who had grown a little taller, and said with a smile, Little Anna, have you been happy recently? Anna nodded obediently. I just miss your cooking, little Amy, and big sister Anne. Then eat more later. Little Amy and the rest should be back soon. Meg smiled and scratched the little one's nose. She was still so obedient and sensible. Boss. Shirley nodded slightly to Meg with a beautiful smile on her face. Sit for a while first. We'll start eating when they're back. Meg nodded with a smile. He was a little surprised by Shirley's aura. He hadn't seen her for half a month, and she had already successfully broken through to the 9th tier. Shirley nodded and sat at the side. Anna followed behind Meg and helped Meg. She was a qualified chef. Princess, is boss really back? Little Amy is back too. Phyllis's voice sounded outside the door as she followed Irina in. Your Highness. Shirley stood up and bowed to Irina. Irina looked at Shirley and also looked surprised. She said, You've broken through. I was lucky to have a breakthrough last night. Shirley nodded. Wow, Shirley, aren't you a magician of the 9th rank now? That's amazing. Phyllis, who had followed them in, looked at Shirley in amazement. Among the younger generation of the elves, apart from the princess, Shirley was the strongest. Even Sally, who had become the princess of the elves, was still a grade 8 mage. Compared to the princess, I'm still far behind, Shirley said humbly. Boss, you're finally back. However, Phyllis's attention was attracted by the delicious food on the table and Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. She lifted her skirt and ran to the kitchen excitedly. Seeing that Phyllis was about to give him a hug, Meg glanced at Irina, who seemed to be smiling. Meg decisively picked up the oil pan at the side, and said at the same time, Be careful, the oil pan is hot. Phyllis hurriedly slammed on the brakes. She looked at Meg with a red face. She was 30% excited and 70% shy. She didn't expect that she would run over and hug Boss in a moment of excitement. Phyllis, have you been cooking well recently? Meg asked casually as he poured the hot oil on the head of the steamed fish with diced hot red peppers. The red chopped peppers danced in the sizzling hot oil, injecting soul into the fish head. The fresh aroma filled the air. I've been in charge of improving the food of the night elves. Now, the cafeteria can provide eggplant with garlic sauce and mapo tofu every day. These are everyone's favorite dishes. Also, we can eat hot congee with pork and century egg in the morning, Phyllis said with a nod. Very good. You've done well in bringing delicious food to more people. Meg looked at Phyllis with admiration. This was his original intention of teaching Phyllis how to cook. Phyllis's face turned even redder, but she couldn't hide her smile. There was nothing more delightful than being praised by Mr. Mag. I've been helping Big Sister Phyllis at the textile factory recently. I even taught them how to cut vegetables, Anna said as she raised her little hand. Little Anna is also very good, Meg said with a nod. Yes, Uncle Meg is very good. I learned from Uncle Meg, Anna said with a smile. Oh yes, boss, is there anything I can help you with? Phyllis asked Meg as she looked at him. She hadn't been to the cafeteria for a long time. If the princess hadn't told her that the boss and the others were back and that they were gathering tonight, she would have come to help. No need. Just bring this steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers out. The dishes are all ready. We're just waiting for everyone to arrive. Meg shook his head with a smile. Mr. Meg, you're finally back. Meg had just removed his apron and walked out of the kitchen when an excited voice was heard. A figure had already pounced on him. Before he could react, she had already pounced on him and wrapped her legs around him skillfully. Oh, this damned softness seems to have grown a little. From the familiar softness on her face and the faint fragrance, Meg already knew who she was. It's not suitable for children. Barbara, who had just entered, reached out her hand to cover Connie's eyes. Then, she looked at Gina's turbulent waves with envy. I'm already an adult. Connie shrunk her head and wanted to see what was going on. Gina, don't stop. Before Irina exploded, Meg quickly released Gina, who was wrapped around him, and stood at attention, keeping an arm's distance away. Mr. Meg, I missed you guys so much. Gina looked at Meg with a blushing face. Her face was filled with joy and excitement. Gina was good in everything. She was a good, obedient, and pure girl. It was just that the way she expressed herself was a little too direct. It couldn't be helped. Girls who grew up in the deep sea were just so naive and sweet. Luckily, she met such a great and upright man like him. Otherwise, she would have been eaten up long ago. Yes, I missed you guys too. Meg nodded with a smile. His gaze swept across the place without leaving a trace. Yes, it was indeed getting bigger. Then, he looked at Barbara, who had just walked in through the door. She was still mediocre. It looked like the moon's gravity was indeed not enough. Or could it be that children who grew up eating seafood had more protein? Is there barbecue tonight? Barbara's gaze was already attracted by the barbecue skewers that were piled up into a meat mountain. Her eyes were sparkling. Why is she here too? Camilla's expression became a little nervous when she saw Irina when she walked in. She was clearly with Alex today. Why was she at Amy's? Was she here to freeload? We're back. Amy skipped in through the door. Then, she jumped into the arms of the young ladies one by one and kissed them on their cheeks. Then, she announced with satisfaction, "Let's start our feast." Chapter 2144. This was indeed a feast. The table was filled with dishes, and almost emptied the restaurant's menu. Meanwhile, the meat skewers piled up like a mountain at the side were even more exciting. When Amy, Mia, and the rest returned from the ice cream shop, everyone in the restaurant was present. They had been separated for some time, so they naturally had to exchange greetings. Meanwhile, Connie, who had become the great chief of the orcs, became the target of everyone's teasing. After all, this little girl was so gentle and lovely when she first came to the restaurant. Who would have thought that not only would she become the chief of the Fog tribe, but she would also become the great chief of the orcs now? Big Sister Connie, when I go to the orcs in the future, I just have to mention your name, and I can do whatever I want, right? Amy looked at Connie curiously, and even imitated Crab to walk sideways. If I don't mention my name, will anyone be able to stop Connie from walking sideways? Connie asked with a smile. Everyone laughed as well. Come to think of it, Amy was the real little genius. All right, let's sit down and talk, Meg said, and sat down first. Irina sat down beside him. Although she didn't interact with him, she acted like the hostess. Amy climbed onto her high stool, and the other girls also sat down one after another. The large round table was now full. This was the last time Amy's was so lively. After all, ever since Meg and the rest left Chaos City for Rodu, the restaurant had been closed, and it was especially quiet. There was good food and wine, and everyone ate and drank to their heart's content. However, no one mentioned the series of events that happened at the City Lord's castle today. Camilla looked at Meg and asked, "Is the restaurant going to resume business?" The ladies also quietened down and looked at Meg. The restaurant was closed for 2 weeks. This was a long break that they had never had before. Soon, all the races would declare a state of war to fully protect the Alliance's northern expedition. At this time, it was obviously not suitable to continue traveling with the children. No, Amy's holiday is still in 2 weeks. I plan to wait for her to start school before reopening. Meg shook his head with a smile. What was interesting was that the employees of Amy's were now closely linked to the fate of the Norland continent. Whether it was Connie, who was going to lead the orcs northward, Camilla, who was going to become the leader of the vampires, or Barbara, who was going to build the sealing spell formation, all of them had important roles to play. Is that so? That's good. I still want to take some time off, Barbara said vaguely as she bit into the meat skewer. Connie looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, "But it's not too safe outside. Boss, it's better if you don't bring Xiaomi and on a long trip. It's not safe." Camilla nodded and said, "That is indeed the case." Although it was a little despicable of Meg to watch her photo stone for the entire night, other than that, he was a nice person. He cooked well and got along well with everyone. Yebamia put down the bowl in her hand, and asked Connie with concern, "Did something happen? Let's not go on long trips for the next few days." "It's good to stay in Chaos City," Connie said. Yebamia hesitated, and asked, "Then, will Elizabeth be in danger?" Connie looked at Camilla with an unnatural expression. The news about Rankster had been brought up many times during the meeting today. Elizabeth had not been found yet. This was the news that the great elder of the Frost Dragon tribe, Douglas, had revealed personally, and hoped that the other tribes could provide some help. As colleagues and friends, they were naturally concerned about Elizabeth's safety. Yebamia and Elizabeth were inseparable, and had the closest relationship. If she knew about Elizabeth's current situation, she would be very worried. "She's a smart lady. She'll be fine," Irina said. Upon hearing that, Yebamia relaxed a lot. She nodded at Irina with a smile, and said, "Thank you. It's rare for us to gather together today. Everyone has already started to leave this small restaurant, and we don't know when the next time will be. Come, let's eat and drink to our heart's content." Meg raised his glass with a smile. "Cheers." Everyone raised their glasses, and then clinked them with a smile. In the square, a figure was staring at the brightly lit Amy's in a daze. Although she couldn't see the people in the restaurant, and couldn't hear their chatter, the warm light still made her feel warm in this cold night. A faint smile appeared on Sally's face. Even though she couldn't go in, she could sense the energy emanating from it just by looking at it from the outside. She turned and prepared to leave. The restaurant's door opened. Since you're back, why don't you come in for a drink? A gentle voice sounded, and Sally stopped in her tracks. After hesitating for a while, Sally turned around and looked at the figure standing at the door. That gentle smile still made her feel at ease, and that pair of clear eyes made it hard for her to refuse. A smile bloomed on her cold face like a flower. It turned out that someone was waiting for her return. This feeling was really good. Aisha. Yabamiya walked to the door and saw Sally standing outside. Her eyes lit up, and then she flew over and hugged her. She said happily, "You're finally back." Sally was a little unaccustomed to Yabamiya's enthusiasm, but the warm feeling of being held in Yabamiya's arms immediately warmed her heart. Sister Aisha. Amy also ran out with a drumstick in her hand. She opened her arms and ran to Sally, but when she saw Aisha in her snow-white dress and her slightly oily hands, she stopped in time. Here, a warm beggar's drumstick that just came out of the shell. Here you go. Sally looked at the drumstick in the little girl's hand and felt a little touched. The little girl treasured food the most. Smelling the tempting roast chicken aroma and looking at the oily drumstick, her throat moved a little. Only then did she remember that she hadn't eaten anything today. It's super delicious. This is the only one left. You can have it all. Amy stood on her tiptoes and tried to raise the drumstick higher. Thank you, Amy. Sally took the drumstick and took a bite. The crispy skin wrapped around the fat and tender chicken. When she took a bite, the crispy taste blossomed in her mouth, and the smooth and tender chicken meat jumped out uncontrollably. Her taste buds went crazy. She hadn't tasted anything worthy of being called delicious in a long, long time, and this drumstick evoked all her memories of Amy's. This warm place was also a place rich in delicious food. Oh, there was a person who was good at creating delicious food. And a group of warm people. She looked at the familiar and unfamiliar people standing at the door of the restaurant, but when they stood together, they were as warm as a family. Chapter 21:45. Sally, who had just eaten a drumstick, couldn't resist everyone's enthusiasm, so she walked into the restaurant. Then, her gaze landed on Irina, who was sitting at the dining table. She paused in her steps, looking a little surprised and a little embarrassed. Camilla looked at the two of them with a strange expression. Barbara and Connie also had similar expressions. They knew their identities, and it was indeed a little awkward to meet in such an occasion. "I'll add a seat for you." Irina took out a foldable chair and placed it in an empty space at the side. "Thank you." Sally nodded slightly. Her expression relaxed immediately, and she sat down on the foldable chair. Sister Aisha. Anna went forward and looked at Sally happily. "Little Anna has grown taller too," Sally said with a smile as she touched Anna's head. "I haven't thanked you for what happened last time." Shirley sat down beside Sally and looked at her sincerely. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Sally nodded slightly. She looked at Shirley and opened her mouth, but she didn't say anything. "This is Aisha, the restaurant's second employee, and also the restaurant's second customer after the opening." Meg introduced her to everyone, and also the restaurant's new employee to Sally. In Mama's, she was still Aisha, at least tonight. As expected of a woman who can become a princess. She's not simple at all. Camilla was secretly surprised by the two women's magnanimity. They could actually meet without any enmity and even sit at the same table to eat. This banquet only ended and all the barbecued meat was finished at midnight. Meg stood at the door and looked at everyone who left. He smiled and said, "I hope that all of you will have a bright future, but I also hope that all of you can be happy. No matter where you are, or what kind of person you become, Mamas will always be here. The door will always be open to all of you." The ladies looked at him and smiled. Their smiling faces were brighter and more beautiful than the starry sky. Meg stood at the door and watched the ladies leave. "Looks like you're really popular with girls." Irina's voice came from behind him. "If you're talking about culinary skills, then I admit that this is indeed a talent that can't be hidden." Meg turned around and sighed softly. "What if I'm talking about your mouth?" Meg frowned and shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. Other than you, no one should know that I'm good at talking." Irina was stunned for a moment. She suddenly understood something and blushed. She hit his chest with her hand and rebuked, "Glib tongue. Very pertinent." Meg nodded and closed the door. This was a farewell banquet for those who were about to enter the battlefield, including Meg himself. This was a war that Meg couldn't control. They were going to face the powerful Cthulhu, as well as Rankster and the million-strong undead army under his control. Many people would die in this war. No one could guarantee who would die. Connie would personally lead the orc army to the north. Camilla would also be in the vampires' battle order. Barbara would follow her master to the front line to set up the array formation. Shirley had already applied to join the Night Elves' battle force. Gina would follow Lantish to the battle. Sally would definitely follow the Elven army to the battle. Meg would fight alongside them, just that he wouldn't be the boss this time. How magical. When Meg came to this world, he only thought about how to drag his broken body and survive in this damn world with Amy. But now, he had to save this world with his friends from the restaurant. "Are you confident?" Irina asked softly behind him as she looked at Meg, who was standing by the window in a daze. Meg turned around and smiled at Irina. "I'm still far from the Manchu Han Imperial feast that I promised Amy." "What about me?" Meg reached out and held her waist gently. "I think Amy is sensible now. When we come back, I'll give her a little brother or sister." Irina blushed and was a little angry. She looked up and met his affectionate and gentle gaze. Her heart trembled, and she nodded subconsciously. "Seems like you had a good rest." Sally had just returned to the courtyard of the Elven diplomatic mission in the city lord's castle when Helena's voice came from the room with the door open at the side. Sally's expression changed instantly. She hesitated for a while, but still walked into Helena's room. Helena looked at her, and went straight to the point. "Let me ask you. Do you want to stay in the forest or go to the north?" "Go to the north." Sally didn't hesitate at all. "I need someone to look after the rear. That person can't be me." "Very good. If your father had half of your courage, he wouldn't have ended up like this." Helena nodded with satisfaction. Sally remained silent. She didn't want to talk about that man. In the courtyard next door, in the study with the doors and windows closed, André looked at Dominic, who was sitting opposite him, and said in a low voice, "Alex has chosen you to be his assistant, so he will definitely ask you about the art of war and tactics. You have to preserve the Roth Empire's strength as much as possible. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. This is an ancient saying." Dominic was silent for a while before nodding. "Yes, Your Majesty." André was also silent for a long time before he said, "If you meet Josh on the battlefield, kill him. Don't leave him alive." "Your Majesty." Dominic was a little shocked, but he quickly nodded. "Yes." The next morning, Meg came to the city lord's castle for a meeting with Dominic. Just as Meg had expected, the Roth Empire had already prepared 2 sets of war plans for the northern expedition before the meeting. One was a war plan for the Roth Empire to fight alone if the negotiations failed. The other was a detailed war plan for the various races after they joined forces. Moreover, the Roth Empire had very detailed information about the polar ice plains, including a newly drawn topographic map that had detailed markings on every mountain range and canyon. Meg looked through the detailed battle plan carefully before putting it down. You and I both know that this is not the best plan. Meg looked at Dominic and shook his head in disappointment. Dominic was silent for a while before he nodded. This is the plan that was prepared beforehand. Marshall, you are not suited to lying. Meg smiled. This is the plan that was modified last night, right? In order to reduce the losses of the Roth Empire's cavalry, there are many loopholes that are fatal to the Alliance army. Dominic's expression stiffened. I am very disappointed. Meg shook his head. You should be clear that when you wrote this plan, you are no longer just the Marshal of the Roth Empire. You are the Marshal of the entire Alliance army. No matter what race they are from, they are your soldiers now. They are all fighting to protect this world. Chapter 2146. There were only 2 people in the spacious meeting hall, but the atmosphere was a little tense. Meg looked at Dominic calmly. This Marshal of the Empire was lowering his head slightly at this moment. I know this is what he wants. As the Marshal of the Empire, you can't reject this request. Meg broke the silence. He looked at Dominic and said, however, Marshal, you are now the Deputy Commander of the Alliance Army. You bear the heavy responsibility of leading the Alliance Army to protect the Norland continent. You are no longer just the Marshal of the Roth Empire. Dominic looked up at Meg. Before we became soldiers, we swore to be knights. We should protect the weak. This is what you said to me when we first met. Meg looked at Dominic. Now that all the races are sincerely sending their troops to the Roth Empire and forming an alliance army to go north, if the Roth Empire still upholds the principle of empire supremacy, I will not accept it. I didn't manage to do what I lectured you all back then. It is really a little ironic. Dominic laughed self-deprecatingly. Then, he stood up with a serious expression. I will resign from my position as the Marshal of the Roth Empire and participate in this war as the Deputy Commander of the Alliance Army. I will do my best. Meg also stood up and looked at Dominic. Happy working with you, Marshal. Rodu, Romo Street. Saipan Tavern. A lady in a black Lolita stood at the entrance of the tavern. She looked up at the signboard, and then at the tightly shut door with a disappointed expression. 3 silver coins. After struggling for 2 days, Vicky finally came to Romo Street with the note. Only when one was in charge would one know how expensive food was. Vicky only understood this recently. It couldn't be helped. The people in Rhoda didn't know what opera was at all, let alone spend dozens of copper coins to watch an opera performance. Of course, the poor condition of the opera house was also one of the reasons. When she recruited the team members, she was very ambitious and drew a huge pie for them. Now, they couldn't even eat the crumbs. All of them were so hungry that they looked sallow and emaciated. This morning, 5 team members left a letter and left without saying goodbye. They went to the Marcus Singers, where they could eat and sleep, and that was enough of an attraction. Today, Pascal had used money to humiliate her and seduce the other members. This was the reason why she had decided to come here. When had she ever suffered such grievances? Compared to Pascal and the wretched playboy, the uncle who could appreciate their performance was simply too amiable. If he had to make a choice, he would definitely choose that uncle. From his attitude towards the 2 little girls, it could be seen that he was not a bad person. However, the tavern was closed, and there was a closed notice hanging on the door. Sigh, Vicky sighed. She touched the few copper coins she had left after buying breakfast for her team members. If she only ate porridge, she could survive for a few more days. However, if 5 of them left today and another 5 left tomorrow, she would become a general without an army in a few days. A year's worth of hard work had been completely wasted. She was too ashamed to face the members whose dreams had been ignited by her. "Hello, are you here for a drink?" A voice sounded from behind Vicky. Vicky turned around and saw a girl with delicate features. She was about 15 or 16 years old. "I'm here to look for the uncle at the tavern. It seems that he's not here." Vicky shook her head and was a little disappointed. "Are you Vicky?" Mara asked tentatively. Vicky's eyes lit up. She looked at Mara carefully and said, "You know me. Have you seen any of our performances?" "Performance? I haven't seen it." Mara shook her head. "I see." Vicky was a little hurt. "Then how do you know my name?" "It's my master. He told me to keep an eye out for a girl who might come looking for him in the next 2 days." Mara smiled and said, "I just saw you standing at the door for a while. You looked like you had something on, so I came to ask." "I see." Vicky nodded. She didn't think that the uncle would really take what happened before to heart. "Then when will he be back?" "I do have something to talk to him about." Vicky asked. "He said he'll be away for a few days, but he didn't say when he'll be back." Vicky was a little disappointed. If it was another 2 days, the members would probably all leave. "Thank you." Vicky and Mara nodded and turned to leave. She had to walk around the streets and see if she could find a way to make money, or sell 1 or 2 of the things she brought from home. Perhaps she had already sold most of the things that could be sold, and the rest were things that couldn't be sold or couldn't be sold. Sigh, just a single cent is enough to make this young miss worry to death. "Wait!" Mara called out to Vicky. "Huh?" Vicky looked at Mara in confusion. "My master asked me to give you something before he left. He also asked me to take you to a place," Mara said. "What is it?" Vicky's heart was filled with anticipation. "I'm not sure. Wait for me." Mara jogged back to Titan Tavern. Soon, she came out with an oiled paper bag and handed it to Vicky. Vicky took the heavy paper bag, looked at Mara, and opened it. There was a black money bag, a bunch of keys, and a letter. Vicky opened the money bag first. The 50 shiny silver coins lit up her eyes. Then, she picked up the bunch of keys, a little confused. "Let's go. I'll take you to that place," Mara said as she walked forward. Vicky hurriedly put away the things and quickly followed. Soon, Mara stopped in front of a house. It was a 2-story building. Compared to the houses on both sides, it was twice as big and taller. The 2-story building was as tall as the 3-story building on the side. The plaque on the door had long been removed. The slightly old door looked a little dusty, probably because no one had come in or out for a long time. "What's this?" Vicky looked at Mara in confusion. "Master didn't tell me anything." Mara shrugged and looked at the key in her hand. "But you can try to open it." Vicky went forward, picked up the dusty padlock, inserted the key, and twisted it gently. Click. With the crisp sound of a spring, the padlock was opened. Mara pushed the door open and light shone in. A spacious hall appeared in her sight. Dusty benches were casually piled up in the corner. But what attracted Mara's attention was the stage in the hall. Rays of light fell on the stage from the windows in the front and back of the room. The dust floated, but it also illuminated her dreams. Chapter 2147. Vicky stood at the door in a daze, her big bright eyes full of surprise. Mara took a look at the circus theater that had been closed for a long time. Miss had taken her here when she was little, but it had been closed for 2 or 3 years. But why was this beautiful lady so happy to see this old theater? Can I go in and take a look? Vicky looked back at Mara and asked. Mara nodded. Master has given you the key, so I don't think he will stop you from entering. Thank you, Vicky said and walked into the theater eagerly. Her black leather boots kicked up a layer of dust on the ground, but Vicky didn't care. She looked around as if she had found a treasure. The spacious hall was more than 300 square meters, and the floor was about 6 meters high. It looked very spacious. There were many windows in the front and back, allowing light to enter the theater. The stage was directly connected to the second level. While it was more transparent, it also received more light. There were a few ropes above the stage, and claw marks could be seen everywhere on the stage. This must be a circus theater, and a specially built one. It looks so good. Vicky was full of love. This was her dream theater. Of course, this was a twisted dream after being beaten by reality countless times. It could shelter the guests from the wind and rain, had a decent stage, seats for the guests, and a small window for selling tickets. That was enough. And this theater could satisfy all of her needs. Although it looked dusty at the moment, it was already sparkling in her eyes. Is that gentleman planning to rent this place to us? Vicky asked Mara, who was standing at the door. Maybe he said so in his letter, Mara reminded. Vicky quickly took the letter out of the bag and took out the letter. Hello, Miss Vicky, I'm glad that you can read this letter. It means that you have considered my proposal. Artists can't live and perform in a decent manner. This is the sorrow of the times. Here are 50 silver coins. It's a small token of my appreciation. I hope it can solve your current problem. I have also prepared Building 101 for you. If you are satisfied, this can be your performance venue. Of course, as a businessman, I hope to invest in your future. I will take 10% of the annual profits of the Black Cat Opera House as a reward and will not participate in anything else. I hope you can consider it carefully. If you agree, you can move into Building 101 directly. If you can't accept this condition, you can return the key to Mara. Hades. A short and concise letter. Vicky read it carefully twice, feeling conflicted. Are you stupid? Do you still need to consider such a kind angel investor? Isn't it much better than that stinky man who lusts after our bodies? Vicky suddenly said in a slightly irritated manner. Ha! Mara was stunned and looked at Vicky in surprise. She even scolded herself. Vicky clenched the key in her hand tightly as if she had grabbed onto a life-saving straw, and her gaze became resolute. Black Cat Opera House, let's start anew here. I must let everyone know that the best opera house in the world is here. Vicky composed herself and walked out of the theater. Then, she showed the letter to Mara, and said, Mr. Hades has lent this building to us temporarily. We will open the best opera house here in the future. You want to open an opera house here? Mara's eyes lit up. Then, she asked in confusion, what is an opera? Vicky's expression fell. This was the current situation of opera in Rodu. Leader, Lausi and Bao have left too. Vicky pushed open the door and walked into the dilapidated courtyard. A middle-aged man said in a low voice. The other actors also looked at Vicky worriedly. After seeing that she was empty-handed, they couldn't hide their disappointment. If this goes on, our Black Cat song troupe will really break up. A thin and tanned girl clenched her fists and said angrily, they are too heartless. If it weren't for our leader, they would have starved to death. Now, they have betrayed us. The others were silent, and their expressions were a little complicated. The weather still didn't show any signs of warming up. Their stomachs were never full. If this went on, they didn't know if they could survive this winter. Vicky glanced at everyone, and raised her beautiful eyebrows. She looked a little angry. She reached out to take the black money bag from her waist, pulled the string, and slammed it on the table. She said loudly, "Why are you all looking so sad? Isn't it just money? Look at what this is." The shiny silver coins shone with a dazzling light. Pairs of eyes in the room lit up. The troop members looked at the money bag on the table in disbelief. "This. Leader, where did this money come from?" The middle-aged man asked in a trembling voice. "Leader, you didn't sell yourself, did you?" The tanned and skinny girl said with a sorrowful expression. Hearing that, the troop members looked at Vicky with concern and anxiety. They all knew that the rich young master had been pestering their leader. Their leader had never been nice to him. But other than him, they really couldn't think of where their leader had gotten so much money. "Sell what? Even if I sold you, I wouldn't sell myself." Vicky rolled her eyes, and then smiled. "This money was given by the uncle who came to watch our performance last time. Not only did he give us money, he also provided us with the venue of the opera house. I've already agreed to work with him. Our hard days are over." "Really? We have a new opera house. We're finally leaving this place." Everyone was surprised and overjoyed. They were so excited that some of them couldn't help but cry. Vicky looked at everyone and smiled. Her eyes turned red. She turned her face to wipe her tears and said, "Okay, I've called for 3 carriages to wait outside. Hurry up and pack your things and move. I'll bring you all to eat good food later." "Okay." Everyone agreed. They took their few belongings and extinguished the fire in the house. Then, they went out. "Impressive. This is too awesome. This stage. I love it, I love it." Outside Building 101, the troop members looked at the open door of the opera house with their mouths agape. They couldn't hide their shock. Vicky looked at the remaining 8 troop members and couldn't help but blame herself. If she hadn't been so stubborn yesterday and came to look for the uncle earlier, then all of them would be here today. She didn't blame the troop members who left. It was true love for them to be able to stay with her until now. It was normal for them to not be able to hold on. Drinking water really wasn't enough to fill one's stomach. From today onwards, this is our home. Let's start afresh. Vicky looked at the troop members and said with a smile. "Okay." The troop members responded with a smile. Everyone carried their luggage into the opera house and went out to have a simple meal. They couldn't wait to find the cleaning tools in the opera house's utility room and started cleaning. Vicky found a wooden board, wiped it clean, and wrote a line of words with a pen. Then, she hung it outside the door. Black Cat Opera House. Chapter 2148. As an unqualified commander, Meg relied on the experience he inherited from Alex, and had a deep discussion and plan with Dominic. The scale of this war was huge, and it involved many types of soldiers. The situation was very complicated, and it was even more exaggerated than the racial war back then. The racial war back then was just 2 to 3 races killing each other. It looked like a mess, but there weren't many large-scale wars. Furthermore, the Allied army was formed at the last minute. They might not even be able to trust each other, let alone have a tacit understanding. Dominic looked at Meg's defensive formation on the sand table with a frown, and said, "With such an arrangement, once the defense line falls, it will be very difficult to control the situation. With the million-strong undead army charging fearlessly, a simple defense line won't be able to hold them off. Hence, I plan to make an opening in these 3 canyons and let them in. We'll split the million-strong undead army, and then stretch out the battle line. We'll set up artillery battalions and magic casters on both sides of the canyons to kill the undead army as much as possible. We'll set up a pocket-shaped encirclement at the exit of the canyons, and set up spell formations and a large number of soldiers to guard it. The giant dragon army will go forward and kill the undead army in advance with their air superiority. However, our ultimate goal is to lure Cthulhu into the spell formation and seal it. Once Cthulhu is successfully sealed, the undead army will be leaderless, and the crisis will be resolved. Meg fiddled with the sand table, and came up with a new formation. Dominic's eyes lit up. He circled the sand table twice, and then frowned, and said, "With such an arrangement, we can stop the undead army for a while, but how can we lure Cthulhu into the seal?" Demons were mysterious and unpredictable. If not for the fact that the seal outside Chaos City had been lifted, they wouldn't even know that such a terrifying existence was sealed on the Norland continent. They had a long lifespan, which was even longer than the existence of a race. Even the giant dragons, who had a long lifespan, knew nothing about this. They had terrifying abilities. They couldn't be killed, and they couldn't even be severely injured. Only a sealing spell formation passed down from ancient times could reseal them. However, this was a very difficult task. In its eyes, their scheme was probably nothing more than a joke. "I wonder if you've heard of the 1,000-layer cake theory?" Meg asked. "1,000-layer cake?" Dominic shook his head. This sounded like a theory about food. What was that? A mysterious smile appeared on Mag's face. Cthulhu has existed for countless years, and its intelligence must be far beyond our imagination. However, no matter how intelligent it is, it still has to think when faced with the trap that we set up. He probably saw that this was a trap, so he's on the second floor. He thinks we're on the first floor, but we're actually on the 5th floor. When the time comes. Mag smiled. "I'll leave the deployment of the troops to you, and leave the matter of the traps to me. My only request for you is to eliminate the 200,000 undead army, and ensure that the blockade line is not broken through." "All right." Dominic nodded seriously. If he didn't even have this bit of confidence, then he would have wasted his decades as the Grand Marshal of the Empire. Meg went to see Michael to find out about the progress of the cannons. With Miss Hill's full support, the daily production of cannons has reached 300 cannons and 5,000 shells. We have also successfully contacted the dwarves. 50 technicians have arrived with the blueprints yesterday. They will supply the cannons with all their might. The goblins have also promised to supply all the materials needed for the shells. After the dwarves' cannons are mass-produced, Chaos City will focus on producing the shells and shut down the cannons' production line, Michael explained as he brought Meg around the cannons' production workshop. "Miss Hill, you're really broad-minded." Meg nodded. His impression of Miss Hill went up a notch again. Ambitious people emerged in troubled times. Although Miss Hill was a woman, she was very broad-minded and had great foresight. The train that was opened previously had become the best tool for transporting ores. The freight trains traveled between Vic Mountain and Chaos City, and their efficiency had increased tremendously. If it wasn't for the current chaotic situation and the enemy, all the races would definitely pay attention to this smooth transportation route. As long as the Norland continent could survive this wave, the train would definitely become the driving force for development in the next 100 years of peace. If you want to be rich, you have to build roads first. This was an existence akin to the truth. Meanwhile, Miss Hill had Buffett banks in her hands. She also had the advantage of being the first to strike. She even had the core technology of the steam engine in her hands. She was simply an excellent money-making tool. Meg even imagined himself lying on the shoulders of giants in the future, and living a life of financial freedom. Yes. In troubled times, women are not inferior to men. Michael nodded with emotion. Not only Miss Hill, Miss Gloria from Family Moreton came to the City Lord's castle the other day, and said that she wanted to donate a large number of combat cotton-padded clothes to the Alliance army. Gloria. Meg raised his eyebrows. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen that lady who liked to eat tofu pudding for some time. It was noon when he came out of the city lord's castle. The sun shone on his face, and it was a little glaring. The snow had almost melted, and the tips of the willow trees at the side had a little green. It seemed like spring was coming soon. Alex. A surprised voice sounded. Meg retracted his gaze, and looked at the knight standing in front of him who was leading a black donkey. He had a square face, and an emerald sword at his waist. His smile was simple and honest, and his eyes were bright and spirited. Conti Nicholas. His name appeared in Meg's mind immediately. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen him for a few months. He looked a little tanned, and there was a thin and long scar on the left side of his face. It looked like it was left behind by a magic beast's claw. There were many scuffs on his armor, and it wasn't as shiny as before. However, only that pair of eyes were still cool and spirited, like a bright young man. "Hello, I'm Alex," Meg said to him. "I heard that you're not slaying dragons anymore, and are now slaying demons. Is that true?" Conti asked excitedly as he looked at Meg. "That's the plan recently." Meg nodded slightly. "In that case, I can only join Chaos City's Northern Expedition Army to fight alongside you," Conti said with a simple and honest smile. Meg looked at him, and then at the black donkey he was leading. He smiled and said, "The donkey is not bad." Conti reached out to stroke the black donkey's head, and smilingly said, "It's a new partner, but it is indeed not bad." Chapter 2149. "Father, are we going to stay in Chaos City or go to Rodu?" Amy asked Meg as she sat on a stool at the entrance of the kitchen while he was cooking in the kitchen. She was stroking the cat with one hand as she looked at Meg. "What do you think, Meg?" Meg asked with a smile. Amy thought about it seriously, and said, "We can play with Big Sister Mia and the rest in Chaos City, and we can also look for Jessica and Daphne. It's more fun than Rodu." "That's indeed the case." Meg nodded. Apart from the variety of food in Rodu, it wasn't that fun for the two children. However, he still needed a reliable worker before he could get rid of the Saipan Tavern completely. However, as the supreme commander of the Allied army, he really didn't have the time to care if the Saipan Tavern's customers would run away because the boss stood them up. "However, we can watch Miss Black Cat in Rodu. Big Sister's performance is so good. I want to see more." Amy pouted as she stroked Ugly Duckling's chubby face, feeling a little conflicted. Right at this moment, someone knocked on the door. "I'll go open the door." Amy put down Ugly Duckling, and ran to the door with her short legs. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and opened the door with some effort. Two tall figures blocked the door. Amy looked up, and her expression changed slightly when she saw who it was. She exclaimed, "Master, is school starting already?" It was Crassus and Julian. "Hee, it's still early. Little Amy, don't be nervous. We're just here to check on your recent studies and see if you've been slacking off during the holidays." Crassus smiled kindly. "That's right." Julian nodded. Amy pouted, and mumbled sadly, "Shouldn't we eat and play during the holidays? Why do we have to work hard? I don't want to work hard anymore." Her eyes reddened as she spoke, and tears welled up in her big eyes as if they could fall at any time. Crassus and Julian's expressions stiffened slightly. Obviously, they didn't have any good ideas in the face of the little guy's shameless whining. Don't cry. Master was just joking. We haven't seen little Amy in a long time, so we wanted to come and see you." Crassus quickly waved his hand and elbowed Julian. Don't you agree, Julian? Urian elbowed him discreetly, but still nodded in the end. Is that really the case? Amy looked up at the two of them and immediately revealed a cute smile. She raised her little hand and said, I missed you guys so much too, Master. Really? Crassus and Julian couldn't help but smile when they saw the smile on their young disciple's face. Meg came out of the kitchen to welcome them. He looked at the two and said, Masters, you're here. Come in and have a seat. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'm cooking. Why don't you sit down and eat together? Let's eat. Yeah, what a coincidence. We haven't eaten either. It would be a little embarrassing if we ate together, Crassus said as he sat down at the table. Julian glanced at him and frowned. He also sat down at the table. Then sit down for a while. There are still 2 dishes that aren't ready. Meg poured them a glass of water and continued to cook in the kitchen. The two of them had always been at loggerheads. Something must have happened for them to visit together today. Meg listened to the movements outside as he cooked. Little Amy, come over here. Crassus beckoned Amy over. He held her little hand and looked her up and down for a while. He nodded with satisfaction. Although you don't seem to have improved, your face has become a little rounder. You look even cuter. Julian rolled his eyes. He reached out a finger and gently tapped Amy's forehead. A snowflake bloomed between her eyebrows, then quickly turned into an ice crystal and floated up. Not bad. After a while, you'll be able to use your real domain. Julian withdrew his hand and looked at the 5-star ice crystal. He nodded with satisfaction. I've been working hard on my cultivation every day. Amy listened to the 2 masters' praise and said with a smile. Meg also smiled in the kitchen. Although the little girl liked to eat and sleep, she did consciously work hard on her cultivation for 2 to 3 hours every day. Compared to the little buns her age, she could be called a little model worker. Crassus praised Amy again, making her very happy. Little Amy, Master has a few things for you. You have to keep them well. Crassus took out a green space bracelet. With a flick of his finger, a photo stone and a thick book appeared on the table. Amy picked up the photo stone and looked at it. Then, she picked up the thick book and looked at it for a while. She asked, Master, what's this? This photo stone contains some magic tutorials that Master has recorded for you. This book is written by Master himself. It's about close combat magic. It's the only book in the world, Crassus explained with a smile. Oh. Amy nodded. She looked at the 2 items curiously, but soon put them down. She looked up at Crassus with some panic. Master, don't you want me anymore? In the kitchen, Meg also stopped cooking. How could that be? Little Amy is so cute. How could Master bear to not want you? Crassus shook his head. Then why are you giving me these things? Don't you want to teach little Amy magic? Little Amy will be very diligent. Don't give up on little Amy, okay? Amy looked at Crassus anxiously. Tears were already welling up in her eyes. It's not like that, little Amy. Master is just going on a long trip. He's afraid that you won't work hard enough, so he left these 2 things for you. I hope that when Master comes back, you'll have become stronger. When that time comes, Master will personally test your hard work. Crassus smiled and patted Amy's head. Really? Amy sniffed and looked at Crassus suspiciously. It's true. Julian raised his hand, and an ice blue ring appeared on the table. There was also an ice crystal mirror in the shape of a snowflake. Little Amy, these are the things I left for you. Your affinity with ice magic is far above mine. Your future achievements will definitely surpass mine. Julian looked at Amy with a gratified smile. The most satisfying thing I've done in my life is to have you as my disciple. Then when are you coming back? Amy asked the two of them. Very soon. Maybe we'll be back by the time you start school, Crassus said with a smile. Julian nodded. A smile appeared on Amy's face again. She nodded seriously and said, Okay, then I'll work very, very hard to learn magic. When you come back, you'll definitely be surprised. Okay, then we'll wait and see, Crassus said with a smile. Masters, it's rare for us to get together. Why don't we have a drink together? Meg came out with the dishes and a bottle of Moutai from the wine cabinet. Chapter 2150. The dishes were served, and everyone took their seats. And ate quietly and obediently. Amy also put away the gifts from her two masters and began to focus on the drumstick in front of her. Thank you, masters, for teaching Amy so meticulously during this period of time. Here's a toast to you, Meg said sincerely to the two of them as he raised his glass. Then, he drank it all in one gulp. Crassus and Julian were indebted to Amy for teaching her, and they also cared for the father and daughter. Meg would always remember this kindness in his heart. Today, the two of them came here with the intention of saying goodbye. Although the two of them were not present at yesterday's race meeting, they would definitely not sit by and do nothing about the northern expedition. This trip would be dangerous, so the two of them had already begun to make arrangements for their deaths. They had taught Amy everything they had learned in their lives, leaving behind a seed. We should be thanking Mr. Mac for giving us such a good disciple, Crassus said with a hearty laugh. Julian raised his glass and took a sip. Then, he looked at Meg and reminded him, Rome will forge a brand new weapon for Amy. Mr. Mac, remember to ask often. Okay. Meg nodded. Master Rome had mentioned this before, but there had been no news recently. Crassus added, Amy is obedient, but she's still a child after all. It's inevitable that she'll get tired. Mr. Mac, you still have to urge her often. Only the hardworking can become strong. Okay, I'll urge her to practice magic often. Meg nodded. After so many years, Meg once again experienced the feeling of being earnestly taught. Meg drank with the two of them as the student's parent. Moutai was a strong liquor. Even with Crassus and Julian's alcohol tolerance, they were still drunk after drinking a bottle. Good wine. Mr. Mac, what kind of wine is this? Crassus narrowed his eyes and asked Meg. This is Moutai. Take these 2 bottles. When the 2 masters come back, we'll continue drinking. Meg smiled and stuffed 2 bottles of Moutai into their arms before sending them out. The two of them had been fighting for their entire lives, but after they got drunk, they put their arms around each other's shoulders and staggered into the magic potion shop. Father, where are Master and the others going? Amy stood behind Meg and asked curiously. Them. They are going to save the world, Meg said with a smile. Amy's eyes lit up and she looked at Meg expectantly. Then can you bring me along? Not this time, because this is an adult matter. We can only talk about it after Amy grows up. Meg shook his head. I see. Amy pouted and sighed. She muttered softly, I really want to grow up faster. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. He turned around and was about to go in. Mr. Mac. A loud and clear voice sounded. Meg looked up and saw a few burly men walking over quickly. The one in the lead was Sargeras. Keel, Mont, and the rest were beside him. Sargeras, whose shirt was unbuttoned, exuded a ferocious aura from the lava patterns on his body. His aura was very strong, and he had already touched the threshold of 10th tier. Director Sargeras, Meg greeted him with a smile. Mr. Mac, I didn't expect you to really come back. I thought I might not be able to see you today, Sargeras said with an honest smile as he touched his bald head. I just came back last night. Meg nodded. He looked at the big backpack on Mon's back and curiously asked, Are you going on a long trip? Or are you going to do a mission? We are going to respond to the City Lord's call to go to the far north to fight the undead army. We are going to report today. We wanted to say goodbye to you before we left. I didn't expect to really meet you, Sargeras said with a smile. Why did you suddenly decide to go to the north? Meg was a little surprised. He knew about the lava demon situation. They were relying on Sargeras and the Burning Legion. If they were to die in the north, there would be no chance for them to make a comeback. Sargeras smiled and said, If we hide at the back, who will protect you? This is what we should do. Yes. We are all going willingly to fucking undead army. Keel agreed. The members of the Burning Legion also roared with laughter, and the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Meg looked at this group of men, and suddenly felt a sense of respect. Racial hatred could be put aside, and personal safety could be put behind, but they still took on the chivalrous standards. The Burning Legion. At this moment, Meg was moved. Mr. Mac, thank you for your hospitality during this period. You are the benefactor of the lava demons. Goodbye. Sargeras hammered his chest with one hand, and gave a lava demon salute. The leader of the Burning Legion and the others also saluted Meg. Meg nodded with a smile. You're welcome. Come back alive. I will give you as much Rugiamo as you want. Sargeras and the members of the Burning Legion laughed. Burning Legion. Sargeras roared. For the Rugiamo. The members of the Burning Legion replied in unison, and their roars shook the sky. Uncle Big Bald Head, I wish you all the best. Amy raised her little fist. Sargeras looked at Amy with a doting smile on his face. He bent down, and gently bumped his fist with Amy's. He retracted his hand, and was surprised to find that there was a small ring in his hand. Be sure to hit more bad guys. Amy winked at Sargeras. Sargeras smiled knowingly. He accepted Amy's small gift, and left with the Burning Legion. What did Amy give Uncle Sargeras? Meg asked with a smile as he looked down at Amy. It's just a small gift. Amy turned and ran into the dining room. Meg shook his head with a smile. He also turned and closed the door. Then he went straight into the kitchen, and began to stew meat and knead dough. In the evening, Meg sent 2 buckets of Rugiamo to the temporary barracks outside the city in a carriage, and asked the guards to help deliver them to Sargeras. The sun was already setting in the west, but a corner of the barracks suddenly lit up with a bright light, accompanied by the angry roars of burly men. Take this as a little blessing from me. Meg got into the carriage with a smile, and ordered the coachman to return to the city. The carriage stopped in front of Amy's. As soon as Meg got out of the carriage, he saw the 2 girls standing at the door. Hill Buffett and Gloria Moreton. The 2 most sought-after business prodigies in Chaos City were standing at the entrance of Mamie Restaurant waiting for him at this moment. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. Although they were not talking and laughing, at least there was no strange atmosphere. They stood about a meter apart. Hill, in a red down jacket, looked capable and experienced. Her red lips looked even brighter in the setting sun. Just by standing there casually, she gave people a sense of oppression. Gloria, in a white down jacket and a long black sweater skirt, looked more elegant and reserved. Standing next to Hill, her aura was not inferior. Hearing the sound, the 2 girls looked up at Meg at the same time. Chapter 2151. Meg was glad that Irina wasn't home at the moment. Otherwise, even if it didn't become a battlefield, the atmosphere would inevitably be a little awkward. "Miss Hill, Miss Gloria, why are you here?" Meg gave the money to the coachman and then looked at the two with a smile. It had to be said that whether it was appearance or temperament, these two were first-class existences. Although they were still a little lacking compared to Irina, each had their own charm. "We heard that Mr. Meg is coming back today, so we came to visit." At the entrance of the restaurant, we happened to meet Miss Gloria, who was also looking for Mr. Meg, so we waited here together. Hill said with a smile. "Mr. Meg, long time no see." Gloria looked at Meg and said, "I went to the barracks outside the city earlier to deliver some food to a regular customer. It's cold outside, so if you have something to say, let's talk inside." Meg opened the door and let the two in first. "You two should have eaten already, right?" Meg asked with a smile as he brewed a pot of hot tea and poured a cup for each of them. Hill smiled and said, "We had a simple meal, but if Mr. Meg is willing to cook, my stomach is willing to bear a little more pressure." Before Gloria could say anything, her stomach began to grumble. She blushed. Earlier, after finishing her work, she had directly asked the coachman to come to Mamie's and didn't have time to eat. Today, she only had breakfast. Meg smiled and took a menu from the side and placed it between the two. "That's good, I also haven't eaten yet. What would you like to eat?" "Order, it's my treat today." "I'm joking. It's not a working day, so how can we trouble Mr. Meg to cook for us?" Hill said with a smile. Meg looked at Gloria, who was about to refuse, and shook his head with a smile. "No, you are worth it." Hill had contributed both money and effort to build a production line for the cannons as quickly as possible, which was a great help to him. Gloria had also made winter clothing for the frontline soldiers, which was also of great strategic importance in the cold northern region. Just these 2 points alone were enough for Meg to personally cook for them. Hill saw that Meg didn't seem to be joking, so he thought for a moment and said, "Then I'll be blunt. I'll have a steak." Gloria thought for a moment and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Meg to make me a plate of Yangzhou fried rice." She missed Mr. Meg's tofu pudding the most. But she didn't ask for too much of him. To make such an excessive request of request. "All right. Please have a seat." Meg turned and went into the kitchen, TSS. "I heard that you've been busy preparing cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers. How's the preparation going?" Hill asked first. Gloria shook her head slightly with a dejected expression and said, "We are currently working overtime to rush the production, but the number of tailors is limited. With the current progress, it will be very difficult for all the soldiers to wear the new cotton-padded clothes before the battle." She had invited almost all the tailors in Chaos City. Most of them had volunteered, but the number was still limited. She came to Amy's today because she wanted to talk to Mr. Meg and see if he had any other ideas. The northern region is very cold. It's very different from Chaos City. If the soldiers don't have winter clothing, they'll get frostbite easily. Hill frowned. She had been busy with the cannons recently and didn't realize the seriousness of this problem. "Yes. I've tried to get them from other places, but the Alliance army is from different races, and winter clothing is very scarce. It's hard to get enough in a short time." Gloria nodded. In the kitchen, Meg was also deep in thought with a frown. Races with thick skin like orcs, demons, and trolls were still fine, but people with delicate bodies like humans would get frostbite if they didn't have winter clothing to protect them. However, war preparation was never something that could be done in a day or two. Everything happened so suddenly that the various races didn't have time to prepare a large number of winter clothing. After all, no race had considered fighting in the far north. Hill thought for a while, and suddenly, her eyes lit up. I've thought of an idea. What is it? Gloria looked at Hill expectantly. Tailor is a title that requires skills, so the number of tailors in Chaos City is limited. But if you lower the requirement to people who can sew cotton clothing, the number of tailors will become very significant. Hill smiled and said, you might not know, but in Chaos City, many poor people sew their own cotton clothing in winter. You're saying, let the people of Chaos City sew winter clothing for the soldiers? Yes. That's a great idea. Gloria's eyes lit up. She stood up immediately and shook Hill's hand excitedly. Thank you. No. It's nothing. Hill wasn't used to Gloria's enthusiasm. Gloria retracted her hand, and blushed as she said, I'm sorry, I lost my composure a little. However, I have to go to the City Lord's castle right now and request for the City Lord to give the order for the residents of Chaos City to sew winter clothes for the soldiers. With that, she was about to leave. Wait a minute. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. He put his hand on Gloria's shoulder gently, and said with a smile, even if you want to save the world, you have to fill your stomach first. If you're exhausted, no one can do it better than you. But Gloria smelled the tantalizing aroma of the Yangzhou fried rice, and her stomach began to growl uncontrollably. The strong sense of hunger made her eyes light up. Hurry up and eat. You'll probably be busy all night. Meg pushed Gloria back to her seat, and put the spoon in her hand. Gloria's eyes were misty. She picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of fried rice into her mouth. A warm feeling filled her heart. The tiredness of the past few days seemed to be swept away, and her whole body was filled with happiness. Hill looked at Meg, and then at Gloria, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. You understand it again. Meg glanced at Hill's expression from the corner of his eye, and raised his eyebrows. He turned and went into the kitchen. After a while, he came out with a medium-well steak. Thank you. I won't stand on ceremony. Hill nodded slightly. He picked up the knife and fork, and began to eat elegantly. Actually, she didn't have time to eat dinner. The engineer had proposed a few improvements to the cannons, so she wanted to ask Meg for help. It would be great if the cannons could be improved a little. As for why she wanted to ask Meg, maybe it was a baseless superstition. Chapter 2152. Gloria quickly finished a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, and her dispirited state seemed to have recovered a lot. She rose to her feet, bowed to Mag and Shear, and said, Thank you for your solution, Miss Shear, and for your hospitality, Mr. Mag. I'm in a hurry to get to the City Lord's castle, so I'll take my leave now. Goodbye. Take care. Meg stood up and opened the door for Gloria. He watched her get into the carriage and leave. Meg added more water of life to this plate of Yangzhou fried rice. He hoped that Gloria would be able to finish her work energetically. Meg closed the door and sat back at the table. Hill looked at him with a smile. Is the steak bad, or am I too beautiful? Meg picked up his Ruggiamo and continued to eat. He looked at Hill and asked. Hill smiled. I'm just curious. How did Mr. Meg know Gloria? And why did you choose to help her? Gloria is a regular customer. I have a good impression of people who frequent my business. I'll help if I can, Meg said calmly. I see. Hill cut the steak gracefully and smiled. It seems that I've missed a lot of things. I wonder if Mr. Meg is open for business tonight. Today is a rest day. This steak is already overtime. I'm not open for business tonight. Meg refused decisively. What a joke. As a man of principle, he would never bow down to evil forces easily. Besides, he had to consider the possibility that Irina might come home at any time. Miss Hill, what brings you here today? Meg asked. Hill wasn't someone who came to eat out of boredom. Hill put the last piece of steak into her mouth. She put down the knife and fork and wiped the corner of her mouth gracefully. Then she took out a folded piece of paper from her bag and unfolded it on the table. She smiled. I'd like to ask Mr. Meg to look at a drawing for me. Meg glanced at the blueprint and then at the Hill, who was looking at him with a smile. I don't think there's anyone in the world who understands this map better than Mr. Meg, right? Meg leaned back in his chair. Looking at this smart woman, he smiled. Let's lay our cards on the table. The cannon was indeed designed by me. The corners of Hill's mouth rose. Sure enough, her judgment was never wrong. But is this an improved version of the cannon? Meg picked up the blueprint. In addition to his published blueprint, there were 3 other versions of the blueprint. All of them had improvements to the cannons and shells. Hill nodded and said, yes, this is the improvement made by our team of engineers after working for 2 days and 2 nights. The core is to add an array to the cannon, thereby significantly increasing the range and explosive power of the cannon. Meg's eyes lit up and he asked, have you tested it? The first version has been tested. This is the comparison data. Hill took out another piece of paper from her bag and passed it to Meg. Meg looked at the experimental data carefully, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. After the magic cannon was added to the array, the range increased from 8 kilometers to 20 kilometers. The explosive power was also increased by several times, and the diameter of the crater increased by 3 times. Good job. Meg couldn't help but clap his hands and praise. Adding an array to the cannon was a very common way to increase the performance of a weapon on the Norland continent. However, Meg didn't have the knowledge in this area, so he could only provide an original version of the cannon. However, when this cannon fell into the hands of a group of top engineers and craftsmen, they came up with countless improvement plans. The array to increase the range of the bow and arrow was carved on the cannon, and it still provided a strong enhancement effect. After a simple first-tier explosion array was carved on the shell, the power of the shell was increased by several times. Meg put down the blueprint in his hand, and asked Hill, how's the stability? The power was only one aspect of testing the quality of a weapon. The stability was another key. That's why I came to look for you tonight. Hill shook his head. The improvement has increased the power of the cannon, but the instability of the explosion array makes it very easy for the cannon to explode. However, if we use a higher-tier array, the effectiveness will become very low. We can't solve this problem at the moment. I see. Meg frowned and pondered. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he said, can you get me a strengthened cannon, a batch of strengthened shells, and a batch of unstrengthened shells? Mr. Meg, have you thought of a way? Hill's eyes lit up. No, I have thought of someone who can solve this problem. Meg smiled mysteriously. All right, I can arrange it immediately. Where should I send it? Hill didn't ask much. Send it directly to the city lord's castle. We'll go together. Meg stood up, put on his coat, and went out directly. Hill's efficiency was very high. A cannon and a batch of shells were sent to the city lord's castle in no time. Meg asked the people at the city lord's castle to greet Barbara and ask her to come out to see him. Boss, why are you here? Barbara came out of the city lord's castle with 2 blue ice crystals in her hands. She looked at the thick cannon next to Meg and the boxes of mysterious items, and asked, what's this? Barbara, isn't your master an array formation master? I have a very important matter that I need his help with. Meg went straight to the point. Hill sized up Barbara. She knew Barbara's identity. She was the princess of the Moon Nation and had a noble status. It wasn't as if she didn't know that Barbara was working at Mamie Restaurant. However, that array formation master from the Moon Nation had successfully repaired the ceiling spell formation outside Chaos City. Someone with such a noble status and great power would probably be rejected if they went to him directly to ask for his help, right? Sure, boss. Come with me. Barbara nodded without hesitation. After informing Meg, she turned and went into the courtyard at the side. Give me a moment. Meg said to Sheer, and then followed Bobla into the courtyard with a box of cannonballs in his hand. Mr. Meg is indeed not an ordinary person. Hill raised her eyebrows as she became more and more curious about Meg. Master, my boss is looking for you, Barbara said immediately after she entered the courtyard. Meg felt that this was pleasing to the ears. The boss and the teacher were of the same rank. Oh, it's Mr. Meg. May I know what you're looking for me for? Jonas came out to welcome him with a smile. He did not slight Meg at all because of his status. The king of the Moon Nation had reminded him many times to treat Mr. Meg as an honored guest of the Moon Nation. This was the person who saved the princess. Judging from his attitude, there was a chance. Meg knew what was going on. He did not beat around the bush, and went straight to the point. He explained the importance of cannons, and asked Jonas to help optimize the shells. That's it. Jonas took out a shell from the box, and tapped it gently with 2 fingers before putting it to his ear. Chapter 2153. Meg looked at the bomb that had cracked open in Jonas' hand, and raised his eyebrows slightly. He felt that this fellow was indeed something. Jonas studied the cannonball in his hand for a while, then looked up at Meg, and asked, "Who invented this thing?" Meg pointed at himself. "You're really a talent." Jonas gave Meg a thumbs up, and then put the bomb back together. He looked at the explosion array outside for a while, and asked Meg, "Did you add this too?" "No, I don't know magic. This was added by someone else after strengthening and improving it. However, its stability is extremely poor, and it can't meet the requirements for launch." Meg shook his head. "This is more than extremely poor. This is simply murdering one of your own." Jonas waved his hand to erase the explosion array outside the bomb, and shook his head. "The stability of this array is extremely poor. Although it can effectively increase the power of the cannonball, as long as there is friction, it can easily explode, and cause the bomb to explode. Whether it's storage, transportation, or launch, it can't meet the requirements. The person who added this array outside the cannonball is really an idiot." "I agree." After listening to Jonas' analysis, Meg nodded, and then asked seriously, "How can it be improved?" "While increasing the power of the cannonball, it can maintain its stability, and it has a higher cost-performance ratio. It's very simple. Add another protective shell to this bomb," Jonas said with a smile. "How so?" "The explosion array is an extremely simple level 1 array. Even a level 1 magic caster can easily inscribe it. It's indeed an extremely cost-effective choice. The method to maintain its stability is actually very simple. Directly isolate the friction between it and the cannon barrel, and use the cannonball to detonate the explosion array instead of letting the explosion array detonate the cannonball. Therefore, we can add another layer of iron shell outside the cannonball that has been inscribed with the explosion array, and fill the interlayer with iron balls to increase its power," Jonas explained. "Brilliant." Meg's eyes lit up. The solution provided by professionals was indeed different. "Master, didn't you say that our opponents are a pile of bones? What's the point of putting iron balls in there?" Barbara interjected. Can't you put something inside that they're afraid of? As soon as Barbara said that, Meg and Jonas were stunned. That was right. What was the undead army afraid of? Meg suddenly realized something very important. They seemed to know too little about their opponents. Although the Roth Empire was constantly confirming the undead army's movements, they had yet to find out the undead army's weakness. Meg had personally fought against the undead army, but those skeletons could not withstand a single blow from him. However, the soldiers of the Alliance army that were about to head to the front lines did not possess his strength. In fact, they were not even as strong as the Undead Legion. Other than the heavy news that they had no life, no sense of pain, and no fear of death, the soldiers of the Alliance army knew nothing about the strong enemy they were about to face. They weren't even told how to deal with their opponents faster or how to confirm that their opponents had been dealt with. As the supreme commander of the Alliance army, Meg felt a chill run down his spine. He worked hard to bring about the birth of the Alliance army, and tried to provide the Alliance army with stronger firepower and more logistical support. However, in terms of how the ordinary soldiers could kill the undead army more easily, what he did was far from enough. Perhaps we should indeed give a suggestion. He knew what he had to do next. Meg left Jonas's place, and handed the solution to the hill. He returned to the Aden Square and walked around to buy a batch of materials. Then, he went to the textile factory to find Irina, who was making arrangements for the expedition. "Why are you here?" Irina asked Meg, who was standing at the door, as she put down the materials in her hands. "I brought you supper." Meg walked in with the food box, and placed it in front of Irina with a smile. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Irina asked as she took out the fried rice inside. Meg sat down opposite her. "I intend to make another trip to the polar ice plains." "You still want to kill Cthulhu alone?" Irina stopped what she was doing, and looked at Meg. "No, I know I can't kill it alone." Meg shook his head. "I want to know more about those undead warriors. For example, how to kill them more easily." "You can kill them effortlessly. But the Alliance army only has me, and millions of ordinary soldiers. In the Roth Empire's army, knights below 3rd tier make up more than 70% of the population." Meg shook his head. "They will be sent to the front line to face the undead army." Irina was silent for a while before she looked at Meg, and said, "So, what do you intend to do?" "I took some things, and intend to test them on some undead warriors." "I need your help," Meg said. "Let's go." "We'll eat on the way," Irina said as she stood up and picked up the fried rice. "Why don't you eat first?" Meg was a little embarrassed. "There's plenty of time on the way." A golden light lit up under Irina's feet, and the two disappeared from the office. "Oh, yes. Where are the two children?" "I just brought them back to the restaurant. They will take good care of themselves. Julian is just beside them. There won't be a problem." The purple lightning glided across the sky above the ice plains, and landed slowly beside a canyon. Meg looked at the tens of thousands of skeleton soldiers standing neatly in the canyon below, and frowned slightly. They had searched the ice plains for 2 hours, and this was the first batch of undead army that they had found. And the coordinates that the Roth Empire had provided 2 days ago were no longer found any traces of the undead army. These skeleton soldiers were a few meters apart, and stood neatly in the canyon according to their size. Frost hung on their bodies, and they did not move at all, just like ice sculptures. "Why isn't there any movement?" Irina asked, puzzled. Meg was also a little surprised. These skeletons were standing neatly, and it was obvious that they did not exist naturally. From the surrounding traces, they should have been summoned here, but why did it seem like there was no movement at all? At this moment, in the middle of the group of skeleton soldiers, the huge eyes of the giant skeleton that was dozens of meters tall suddenly lit up. Like two red spotlights, they fell on the purple-striped griffin. A black sound wave was released from its body, and those skeleton soldiers seemed to have been awakened. Pairs of red eyes lit up, and the ice on their bodies fell off, revealing the eerie white bones. Roar! That giant skeleton let out a furious roar, and pointed the ice crystal spear in its hand in the direction of Meg and the rest. Countless skeleton soldiers began to climb up the walls of the canyon, and pounced towards Meg and the rest. "What do we do now?" Irina asked, tilting her head. "Let's see if the silver sword works first." Meg took out a long sword that was made of pure silver. Chapter 2154. The long sword made of pure silver shone with a silver glow under the moonlight. Meg stood with the sword in his hand, and looked down at the skeleton soldiers that were climbing up the cliff quickly. Irina looked at the serious Meg and rolled her eyes. "Given your ability, even if you use a wooden sword, you will be able to cut these fellows down like chopping vegetables. The result is not useful at all. This is indeed a problem." Meg nodded. He kept the silver sword in his hand, and took out 2 crossbows instead. These were 2 standard crossbows of the Roth Empire's army. They were engraved with the most basic enhancement spell formation. Meg held 1 crossbow in each hand. One of them was equipped with a silver arrow, while the other was equipped with a normal arrow. His gaze searched for targets among the skeletons, and he quickly chose 2 skeletons that were similar in size. They were obviously of the same race, and they were not very strong. "Help me take a picture of the experiment," Meg said to Irina, and then pressed the trigger. Swoosh! Swoosh! 2 crossbow arrows were shot out, and left a mark in the air as they hit the 2 skeletons at the same time. The silver arrow landed on the skull of the skeleton, and was instantly flattened. The arrow shaft hit the skull, and broke inch by inch. That skeleton only swayed a little, and then continued to climb up as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the other standard crossbow arrow, with a special arrowhead, was nailed on the skull of the skeleton. Although it did not penetrate, it still sent the skeleton flying backward. It fell to the bottom of the cliff, and became a pile of broken bones. "Looks like a terrible improvement." Irina waved the photo stone in her hand with a smile. "Looks like pure silver won't work." Meg nodded, and then took out a peachwood arrow. "Wooden arrow?" Irina was a little shocked. Elves were born archers. Almost every elf was an excellent archer. Her understanding of archery was far above Meg's. Previously, the silver arrows were unable to cause any damage to the skeletons. Now that Meg was using the wooden arrows, wasn't he being too hasty? "These aren't ordinary wooden arrows. These are arrows with mahogany arrowheads." Meg aimed the crossbow at a skeleton and pulled the trigger. The peachwood arrow flew out and accurately hit the skull between its eyebrows. Surprisingly, when the seemingly fragile wooden arrow came into contact with the skeleton, the tip of the arrow actually emitted a golden light. The red light in the skeleton's eyes flickered, and a hole was melted in between its eyebrows. The wooden arrow had pierced into the skeleton's head. The skeleton seemed to have been ignited and quickly turned into a ball of golden fire. As it burned, it fell down. When it landed, it had already turned into ashes. This. Irina looked at this scene in surprise. The skull that the standard crossbow bolts had failed to penetrate was actually pierced through by a wooden arrow. Furthermore, a mysterious ray of light appeared and turned the skull into ashes. Ninth Uncle didn't lie to me. Meg's eyes also lit up. He didn't expect the mahogany arrowhead to have such a miraculous effect. "Let's see how strong a skeleton this mahogany can be." Meg took another mahogany arrow, aimed at a high-level skeleton emitting level 7 strength, and pulled the trigger. The mahogany arrow hit the skull between its eyebrows, and the golden light appeared again. However, at the same time, a dark red scale appeared between the skull's eyebrows, canceling out the golden light. The mahogany arrowhead was quickly worn out, and the rest of the arrow shaft exploded, leaving only a black mark between the skull's eyebrows. It won't work after level 7. Meg was deep in thought. The arrow was already aimed at a level 6 skeleton. The mahogany arrow pierced through the level 6 skeleton. Although it didn't directly melt into ashes like the low-level skeletons, 3 consecutive arrows could kill a level 6 skeleton. Is there a spell formation inscribed on this mahogany arrow? Irina couldn't help but ask. The crossbow bolts that could only pierce through level 3 skeletons and couldn't kill them directly were actually able to kill level 6 skeletons after the seemingly fragile mahogany arrow was replaced. This was really unbelievable. No, it's just a simple mahogany arrowhead. Meg shook his head with a smile. He took out a mahogany sword, and then took out half a jar of cinnabar powder and poured half a jar of water into it. After that, he dipped the mahogany arrowhead in the cinnabar water, and then reloaded the arrow and aimed at the level 7 skeleton from before. Boom! The cinnabar mahogany arrow hit the skeleton, and made a loud sound. The skeleton that was previously unshakable had its skull blown off by this arrow, and its body was also blown into a pile of broken bones. Irina's eyes widened in shock. Mahogany and cinnabar, the magic power is boundless. Meg couldn't help but clap his hands in his heart. This was a killer weapon that could kill the enemy's mid-level combat power. He would never have thought that these things could cross time and space, and actually have such an incredible effect on the Norland continent. Meg carried out a few more experiments. Mahogany and cinnabar would cause an explosion when it came into contact with the skeletons. It had a devastating effect on skeletons below the 7th tier. However, its lethality was limited to skeletons above the 8th tier. 8th tier skeletons had silvery white skeletons with mysterious dark red runes swimming around them. Mahogany and cinnabar could no longer penetrate their defenses. Meanwhile, the lethality of a normal longsword against the skeletons was significantly increased after the cinnabar was smeared on it. As for the mahogany swords, their lethality was a notch higher than the mahogany arrowheads. However, it was obviously not very practical to supply mahogany swords in a short period of time. After that, Meg tried to sprinkle glutinous rice on the skeletons. The low-tier skeletons had an obvious fear reaction, while the skeletons above the 7th tier could ignore the existence of the glutinous rice. Meg kept the remaining half-filled bag of glutinous rice, and said to Irina, "All right, let's capture 100 of them and bring them back. Let's eliminate the rest before Cthulhu arrives." "All right." Irina nodded, and took out her magic caster's staff. Meg also took out the Tian-Du sword. The holy light shone over the canyon, and the flying sword slashed the skeletons. The two of them cooperated with Oz, and went in and out of the canyon 7 times. It didn't take long for them to eliminate a large number of skeletons. Meg looked at the group of skeletons that were annihilated in the holy light, and couldn't help but sigh. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too few magic casters, would he need to use Ninth Uncle's unique skill? However, they soon sensed a powerful aura rapidly approaching in this direction. "Let's go." Meg grabbed Irina's waist, and landed on Ozzy's back. A golden teleportation portal lit up from the mountain peak at the side. Ozzy dived into the portal, and disappeared without a trace. After a breath, a huge figure appeared in the sky above the canyon. It let out a sharp roar as it looked at the skeletons that were more than half slaughtered. Meg and the rest appeared 25 kilometers away. The purple-striped griffin quickly rose into the air, and flew south as fast as it could. Where did you learn those strange methods? Irina looked at Meg curiously as if it was the first time she had met him. In her memory, he believed in the sword in his hand, and never relied on external objects. However, today, Meg had shown a series of strange things that had a miraculous effect on the skeletons. I once read a book that recorded some methods to deal with zombies and undead. I used to think it was a joke, but after trying it today, I realized that it was really effective, Meg said with a smile. Chapter 2155. There's such a book. Irina was deep in thought. Indeed, it was right to read more. However, she did not know if the predecessors had left such a book behind. Did it mean that they had encountered a similar disaster? Actually, I wanted to try the holy water, but I can't seem to find it, Meg said casually. Holy water. Water of life. Or the holy water that those quacks from the Roth Empire used to cheat money? Irina asked Meg seriously. Quacks. Meg thought of the Pope who wanted to abduct Amy to become the Holy Lady. As the church's presence was too insignificant, he had forgotten about them. Speaking of which, they were indeed quite authentic. He wondered if their holy water was effective against the undead army. As for the water of life, he could test it out when he returned to Chaos City. However, compared to a cheap ore like cinnabar, the water of life could save lives on the battlefield. It was too extravagant to use it against the skeletons. Let's go back and try the water of life. If it doesn't have a strong effect on the high-tier skeletons, we'd better save it for saving lives, Meg said. The purple-striped griffin flew into Chaos City and landed in the city lord's castle. Michael watched the image in the photo stone. When he saw the peachwood arrows, which were dyed with cinnabar, explode the skeletons, he was stunned. Alex, you're really a genius. Michael looked at Meg in awe. He knew very well what this meant. The Alliance army had a high proportion of low-tier warriors, and their destructive power against the undead army would be increased by several folds. I'm going to gather the various representatives now, and get them to supply as much peachwood and cinnabar as possible. At the same time, collect enough glutinous rice to send to the front line, Meg said. All right. I'll send someone to arrange for the various contacts to come to the meeting room. Michael nodded. Given the scale of the Alliance army, this was indeed not a workload that Chaos City could handle. Very soon, the contacts that the various races had left in Chaos City arrived at the meeting room. Meg, as the commander-in-chief of the Allied army, after demonstrating the destructive power of peachwood and cinnabar against the skeletons, ordered the various races to try their best to find peachwood to make arrowheads and weapons, as well as to dig up cinnabar and grind it into powder to equip the soldiers. I know of a peach blossom island in the Endless Sea realm. The island is full of peach blossom trees, Camilla, who was the liaison of the demon clan, said. Meg's eyes lit up as he asked, how big is the island? Camilla thought for a moment and said, enough to equip 100,000 evil demons. Very good. The evil demon army's weapons will be upgraded by you all. Meg nodded. It was a good thing that they could get rid of the weapons of the 100,000 Alliance army in one go. Jinx said, if I remember correctly, there is also a huge peach mountain under Dragon Island. If you need peach wood, that would be a good source of wood. Can you confirm the location? How big is it exactly? Meg asked Jinx. Jinx pondered for a moment and said, to the east of Golden Dragon Island. I'm not sure of the exact location, but that peach mountain is very big. There are a few mountain ranges, so it won't be difficult to find it. Meg nodded and ordered, all right. Go and confirm the location and scale immediately. After reporting back, I will immediately send the logging team to cut down the peach trees. All right. Jinx left with the order, and quickly transformed into a golden dragon and disappeared from the sky above the city lord's castle. It might not be easy to find a huge peach mountain, but there will definitely be plenty of peach trees. You all have to try your best to collect more peach wood and make it into weapons for the soldiers. Meg paused for a moment, and said to the liaison officers, sometimes, the people will become your greatest wealth. If they can hand over the peach trees in their yards, I think there will be a surplus of peach wood. The Roth Empire's liaison officers' eyes lit up. It was indeed not easy to find a huge patch of peach trees, but many people in Rodu had peach trees in their yards. We, the goblins, can speed up the mining of the cinnabar ores, but the transportation and grinding of the cinnabar ores into powder have to be done by the various races themselves, the goblin liaison officer said. No problem. Meg nodded. The goblins' mission was also very important at the moment. However, cinnabar ores were not an important ore. Other than the goblins, it was not very realistic for the various races to mine them themselves. One more thing. We need a large amount of glutinous rice. Although it has no effect on the high-tier skeletons, it can suppress the low-tier skeletons, and effectively disintegrate the undead army's charge on the battlefield, Meg continued as his gaze landed on the Roth Empire's liaison officer. On the Norland continent, other than the farmers in Chaos City who grew a small amount of glutinous rice, only the Roth Empire could provide a large amount of glutinous rice. I will relay your order back. The Roth Empire will definitely do their best to prepare the supplies, the liaison officer said seriously. Meg nodded, and then said seriously, lastly, the various races' allied forces have to hurry up and gather in the north. The undead army's whereabouts are unknown, but they are not far from the edge of the ice plains. If the various races can't reach the front line in time, they will be punished for delaying the military. Yes. The various liaison officers' expressions froze. The impromptu meeting ended, and the various liaison officers hurriedly sent the news back to their respective races. Meanwhile, Meg and Irina went to the Grey Temple's training field. These fellows don't look easy to deal with. Sean gasped as he looked at the 100-odd skeletons that were tied up like dumplings that Irina released from her space ring. These skeletons were of different sizes and came from different races. He couldn't tell what race many of them were from. They should belong to the ancient races that had gone extinct. And these skeletons also varied in strength. There were low-tier skeletons that were as small as monkeys, and high-tier skeletons that were as large as giant dragons. The scene that he saw earlier was verified by these 100-odd skeletons. Sean felt his scalp tingle when he thought of the million-odd skeletons in the north preparing to invade the Norland continent in the south. If Alex and Irina hadn't discovered it in advance and warned them in time, giving them time to form the Allied forces, the consequences would have been unimaginable. There aren't many of them. Leave them here for the Grey Temple to practice and test. I'll leave it to you to provide first-hand information to the Allied forces, Meg said to Sean. In terms of intelligence gathering and experiment rigor, Mag could not compare to the Grey Temple. Such professional matters naturally had to be left to the professionals. However, before that, I have to do an experiment. Meg took out a crossbow and loaded a normal arrow. He took out a bottle of life water and poured 2 drops on the arrow tip. Then, he aimed at a 7th-tier skeleton and pulled the trigger. The arrow hit the skeleton's head, but only left a shallow mark. The life water didn't give it any enhancement. Indeed, this holy water is not the holy water. Meg shook his head and kept the life water. Chapter 2156. After handing the skeletons over to Sean, Meg and Irina returned to the restaurant. Meg went upstairs to take a look at the two children. In the room that was still lit up, Amy was lying on the bed with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and was asleep at the desk with a paintbrush in her hand. This child. Meg took away the paintbrush from Anne's hand carefully, and then carried her to the bed and covered her with the blanket. If they were on Earth, and would definitely be a straight-A student, a typical child from another family. Meg stood by the bed and watched the two children in a daze for a while. He tucked Amy in the corner of the blanket that was kicked away, turned off the lights, and left the room softly. "When do you plan to leave?" Irina asked as she stood outside the door and watched Meg close the door softly. "Tomorrow," Meg said with certainty. "Where are the children?" "I plan to ask Mia and Cece to take care of them for a few days." Irina nodded with a smile, and said, "Want a drink?" "Sure. I'll take a shower and go make 2 dishes." Meg nodded. Simple dishes with the best wine. That night, Meg worked very hard for a second child. The news from Chaos City reached all the races very quickly. Rodu, the royal palace. Andre and the officials who were summoned to the royal palace were all shocked and they saw the image on the photo stone. "Your Majesty, according to the report from our spies, our crossbows can only cause damage to third-tier skeletons, but it's very difficult to kill the skeletons. I didn't expect that after changing the mahogany arrowheads and cinnabar, the lethality would multiply," a military official said agitatedly. The spies that were sent to the icy plains of the extreme north had come into contact with the skeleton army a few times. According to the information that was sent back, the Roth Empire's army would be completely at a disadvantage if they were to go head-to-head with the undead army's leader with their current equipment. The ministers could not hide their joy. They did not expect that when everyone was at a loss, Alex would provide such crucial information. Andre ordered in a deep voice, "Peach wood and cinnabar are the most important strategic resources. Immediately draft an urgent decree and send it to the entire country, requesting all regions to cut down all peach wood and transport it to the nearest arsenal to make peach wood arrowheads to replace the original crossbow arrowheads. Seize all the cinnabar stones in the market and in the stores of various places. If anyone disobeys or hides them, punish them according to the crime of treason. They will also be transported to the munitions factory along with the peach wood swords to the front lines. Also, collect all the glutinous rice in the empire by exchanging 1 rice for 1 glutinous rice. Those who keep it will be punished for treason." "Yes." A civil official bowed in acknowledgement and immediately drafted an urgent decree. After presenting it to Andre for confirmation and stamping, it was immediately sent to the various provinces. That night, the guards of Rodu began to cut down the peach trees one by one, starting from the southern part of the city. Regardless of whether they were commoners or nobles, they would read the king's decree directly. If there was any resistance, they would be arrested and imprisoned for treason. When the news spread in the morning, all the households that had peach trees took the initiative to cut them down and place them at the door, waiting for the guards to come and take them away. The guards also directly entered the orchards outside the city. The farm owner had a bitter expression, but he could only ask the farmers to help him cut down the peach trees. In a day's time, the peach wood collected was piled up into a mountain in the arsenal in the north of the city. The task of exchanging for glutinous rice was distributed to the grassroots officials. The granaries of various places were opened, and the glutinous rice exchanged for was all transported to the north. Under the heavy punishment, no one dared to hide it. In the twilight forest, Connie and the various chiefs finished watching the images on the image recording stone. "Do we have peach trees in the twilight forest?" Connie asked the orcs. The orcs also had a considerable number of archers. If they could equip peachwood arrowheads, their lethality would definitely be increased effectively. The chiefs all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't have any peach trees in their tribes. Connie pondered for a while, and said, "Send 5,000 orcs who are good at logging to the dragon territory immediately. Since we don't have any peach trees in the Twilight Forest, we will be responsible for cutting down trees and obtaining a portion of the peach wood. Send another 1,000 orcs to Vic Mountain to bring back the cinnabar stones we need. Great Chief, the number of peach trees in the dragon territory has not been calculated yet, and we have not been invited to cut down trees. Would it be a bad idea to go now?" one of the chiefs asked hesitantly. The other chiefs all nodded in agreement, thinking that this decision was too hasty. However, Connie shook her head, and said, "Don't forget that Jinx is a golden dragon. For a dragon to use many to describe a peach mountain, it must be a forest. As for the dragon's invitation, I will discuss it with the commander and the dragon tribe." Her expression became serious, and she said, "We have to ensure that the orc warriors can use the weapons we made before the battle, and not wait for others to give us the rest of the weapons. With such a short preparation time, no one can take care of a 1,000,000-strong army. We don't have to ask for help. We have to rely on ourselves." "Yes." The chiefs all agreed solemnly, and each went out to make arrangements. That night, thousands of flying mounts took off from the Wind Forest, and flew in the direction of Dragon Island and Vic Mountain. The Wind Forest, Star Cave abode. "We don't have enough peach wood in the forest. Send 2,000 wood-cutting elves and 3,000 elves who are in charge of making crossbows to the Dragon Island's peach blossom forest. Cut down trees on the spot, make bows, and transport them back to the forest. Send another 1,000 elves south to Vic Mountain, and transport the cinnabar stones we need back," Helena ordered. "Yes." Some elves left to carry out the order. Soon, teams of elves set off from the Wind Forest, and headed to two destinations. In the Boundless Sea Realm, the isolated Peach Blossom Island, which almost no one visited on a normal day, was visited by the 10 demon tribes at the same time tonight. Large ships docked at the shore, and the various tribes looked at each other, but no one made a move. Dracula flapped his wings slowly, and floated in mid-air with a smile. "In our Boundless Sea Realm, this island has the most peach trees. Camilla has already promised Alex that we, the demons, will have to supply our own peach trees. Hence, this patch of peach trees belongs to every participating demon. Don't think about it, and distribute it according to the number of participating demons." The powerhouses of the various tribes agreed to Dracula's plan after pondering for a while. Overnight, all the tribes of the Norland continent responded to the call, and tried their best to increase their combat power and self-defense ability before the war started. The miraculous effects of the peach wood and cinnabar greatly increased the allied army's morale. At the same time, it also allowed the various tribes to have a rough estimate of the undead army's strength. They were more confident, and were less fearful. The next morning, Meg woke up energetically, and made a scrumptious breakfast. "Amy, and Father wants to discuss something with the two of you," Meg said with a smile as he looked at the two of them eating breakfast. End of chapter. Chapter 2157. What's the matter? Amy asked as she sucked on her soup dumpling. And also put down her chopsticks and looked at Meg. Meg looked at Irina and smiled. "Your mother and I will be going out for a while. During this time, I will ask Sister Mia and Sister Cece to take care of you. Is that okay? Are you going to save the world too?" Amy looked up suddenly, her eyes filled with anticipation and panic. "Yes. When the world needs us, it's time for us to step up and save it." Meg nodded with a smile. "What about me? I'm super powerful now. Can I go and save the world too?" Amy asked expectantly. "I can't do it now. I'm still too young. I can only do it when I grow up. How old do I have to be considered an adult? Amy asked. You have to wait until you're 18 years old. You can make your own decisions then, because you'll be an adult by then. Meg smiled and reached out to pat the little girl's head. Her soft golden hair was still as smooth as a kitten's, 18 years old. Amy asked thoughtfully. When will you be back? And asked with sign language, her clear eyes filled with worry. We'll be back when Anne finishes drawing Miss Black Cat. Meg looked at Anne and said. He saw Anne's first draft of Miss Black Cat last night. It looked pretty good. If Miss Vicky saw it, she would probably like it. Anne nodded obediently with a reassuring smile on her face. She signaled that she would take good care of Amy. Wear these 2 small stones on your body. No matter what, don't take them off. Do you understand? Irina took out 2 thumb-sized blue crystal necklaces and hung them around Amy's and Anne's necks. What is this? Amy touched the warm crystal. This is a protective talisman. It will protect you when we're not around. Irina looked at Amy lovingly, feeling a little guilty. Ever since Amy was born, she had spent very little time with her. Even during this period of time, she had been busy with the night elves' affairs and hadn't given Amy enough time. The little girl was always so obedient and sensible. She would never take the initiative to ask for anything. It was precisely because of this that it was even more heartbreaking. Once this matter was over, she would definitely stay by her side and accompany her as she grew up. Oh, what a beautiful brew! Amy retracted her gaze and looked at Meg and Irina with a serious expression on her face. Then, you must come back soon. Go home after you're done with the bad guys. Amy and Sister Anne are still waiting for you to come back for dinner. Okay. Amy and Anne are the most obedient. Meg felt a lump in his throat, and nodded with a smile. After breakfast, Meg took 2 ruggiamos and a basket of soup dumplings to the magic potion shop next door. The door of the potion shop was open. When Meg entered, Cece, whose belly was showing, was packing Lulu's luggage. Are you going out? Meg asked in surprise when he saw Lulu's bulging luggage and the big hammer at the side. I'm going to forge, Lulu said with a simple and honest smile. Mr. Mac. Cece greeted Meg and packed the luggage before continuing, I saw the City Lord's castle's order. Lulu is planning to join the arsenal in Chaos City with Master Mobai. We might have to make a trip to the north. Lulu, let's go. Mobai's energetic voice sounded from outside the door. He poked his head in and was surprised to see Meg. Mr. Mac. You're back. Yes, I just came back. Meg nodded. Looking at Mobai, who was carrying a simple luggage bag and a heavy hammer, and Lulu, who had left his pregnant wife behind to report to the arsenal, Meg couldn't help but feel a little touched. What a pity. Looks like I'll have to wait until I'm done with my work before I can eat your rainbow fried rice, Meg said with a hearty smile. Don't worry about waiting. When you come back, you'll have as much fried rice as you want. Meg nodded with a smile. Lulu looked at Cece and patted her head reluctantly. Then, she bent down and kissed her belly gently. Be careful. The baby and I will wait for you to come back. Cece stood on her tiptoes and reached out to touch his face as she whispered. Lulu nodded with a silly smile and said, Then I'll go first. Okay, don't worry. I'll take good care of myself. Cece nodded. Lulu carried the heavy hammer on her shoulder and walked out with the luggage bag in one hand. Then, she said to Meg, Mr. Mac, goodbye. Meg took out 2 ruggiamos and gave them to Mobai and Lulu. There's no wine to accompany you on your journey. I only have 2 ruggiamos. Take care. Meg took out the rujiamos and gave them to Mabai and Lulu. Drinking will spoil things. Rujiamos are enough, Mabai said with a hearty smile. He took a bite of the rujiamo and nodded with satisfaction. This is much better than wine. Let's go. Thank you, Lulu said. Then, she looked at Cece and quickly followed Mabai. The two of them, one tall and one short, walked away in the morning sun with their equally heavy hammers and rujiamos in their mouths. Cece pursed her lips and looked at Lulu's back. Finally, a line of clear tears flowed down her face. This is the breakfast I brought for you. Meg passed the soup dumplings in his hand and a handkerchief to her. Thank you. Cece turned away to wipe the tears off her face. She smiled as she took the dumplings from Meg. Then, she looked at Meg in surprise. Why did Mr. Max suddenly bring us breakfast? They were good neighbors, and often brought breakfast for her master. However, this was the first time that Meg had brought breakfast to them personally. It's cold outside. Don't catch a cold. Come in and eat while we talk, Meg said with a smile as he looked at Cece's protruding belly. Okay. Cece took the dumplings and walked into the medicine shop. I want you and Mia to take care of the kids for a few days. I'm going out. Meg sat down across from Cece and got straight to the point. Cece looked at Meg in surprise. Are you going somewhere far away? The world is not peaceful these days. Where are you going, Mr. Mac? Even Lulu can leave her pregnant wife to go to the factory at the front line. Although I'm not good at anything, my cooking skills are not bad. If I can go to the front line and cook for the soldiers, I'll do my best, Meg said with a smile. Whoa. Cece was stunned. She looked at Meg's determined eyes with respect. She nodded and said, okay. Mr. Mac, don't worry. Leave the kids to us. Thank you. Meg nodded with a smile. He got up, took out a bunch of keys, and placed them on the table. If anything happens, you must hide in the restaurant with the children. I asked Princess Irina to set up a few spell formations. The restaurant should be the safest place in Chaos City. Chapter 2158. After leaving the magic potion shop, Meg went to the ice cream shop. As the shop manager, Yabamiya was already preparing for the opening of the shop early in the morning. As Mimi's hadn't been open recently, the number of customers in the ice cream shop had increased significantly. Many of the regulars who came to ask when the restaurant would reopen would order an ice cream to suit their stomachs. Mia was already very used to her identity as the shop manager of the ice cream shop. It was just that Gina hadn't been helping in the shop recently, so it wasn't so easy to deal with the crying children. Fortunately, she had prepared enough toys and a plan to at least ensure that the order in the shop wouldn't be disrupted by the crying children. Ding! The bell hanging on the door rang when the door was opened. We're not open for business yet, customer. Boss? Mia was a little surprised to see the person who came in. You haven't had breakfast yet, right? I brought some for you. Meg placed the lunchbox in his hand on the table and closed the door. They haven't woken up yet. I came down to do some preparation work. Mia put down the things in her hand and sat at the table with a smile. She opened the lunchbox, and her eyes lit up. It's soup dumplings. Yeah, eat them while they're hot. They'll wait until they wake up, Meg said with a smile. Then I won't stand on ceremony. Mia took out a basket of soup dumplings and closed the lunchbox again to prevent the rest of the dumplings from getting cold. Meg sat opposite her and smiled as he watched Mia sipping the soup dumplings. Compared to when she passed out at the entrance of the restaurant due to hunger, Mia's complexion was rosy now, and her skin was delicate. Although this girl wasn't growing much, her growth didn't seem to be stopping. Looking at the bulging maid uniform, it didn't seem to fit her anymore. Looking at Mia eating the dumplings with a satisfied expression, Meg felt a sense of accomplishment. He wanted to remind the public not to throw away the little dragon girl he had picked up. She would become a dragon maid after a while. Burp, Mia held the shallow plate and licked the soup. She covered her mouth and burped with a satisfied expression. Thank you for your hospitality. Mia stood up and bowed to Meg. Her twin ponytails swayed and she was full of vigor. In this world, there was nothing more blissful than eating breakfast made by the boss after waking up. If there was, it must be the lunch and supper made by the boss. You're welcome. Meg nodded with a smile. Mia sat down again, looked at Meg, and said, by the way, boss, I heard that the outside world is very chaotic right now, and there are demons coming to invade us. If you don't go far away, do you want to reopen the restaurant? I'm here today to ask you for a favor, Meg said. What is it? Mia looked at Meg. Her boss had never asked her for anything. He had always been the one taking care of them and satisfying all their needs. I'm going to go far away for a few days, so I want you and Cece to help take care of Amy and Nan for a few days, Meg said. Mia looked a little nervous, and said, but it's so dangerous out there now. Bobla had solemnly warned them not to leave Chaos City 2 days ago, and the customers who came to the shop during the past 2 days had often mentioned the conscription order from the city lord's castle. Everyone was in a state of panic, and the boss was going to go on a long journey now. Yes. I'm going up north with Chaos City's army to cook for the soldiers at the front line. Meg smiled, and said, it's dangerous at the front line. Everyone who volunteered to be conscripted knows that. I can't do much, but as a man, I should stand at the front line to protect all of you. Boss. Mia looked at Meg with reddened eyes. She wanted to persuade him to stay, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. Don't worry. I'm just going to cook. I don't have to go to the front line to fight with the demons. I'll be back when the war is over. Meg stroked Mia's head with a smile. He knew this lass was worried. Besides, you know I'm not an ordinary chef. I can protect myself. I'll definitely come back safely. You can definitely do it. Mia looked at Meg and nodded seriously. I'll take good care of Amy and Anne. Then I won't say goodbye to everyone one by one. Help me tell them that they don't have to worry. Meg stood up and prepared to leave. Wait. Mia called out to Meg. She took off the golden dragon scale pendant that she had hidden in her clothes, and passed it to Meg. Master left this for me, but I don't have any use for it. Boss, keep it with you. Meg looked at the glistening golden dragon scale in Mia's hand. Lewis had left it for Mia to protect herself. It was a giant dragon reverse scale that could withstand a 10th tier powerhouse's attack. It was extremely precious. But this lass wanted to give it to him without even thinking. Don't worry. I don't need it either. Meg shook his head with a smile. Besides, if I bring it to the front line, I'm afraid your master will sniff it out and chop me up. Mia snickered as if she could already imagine that scene. Meg stopped smiling and seriously reminded Mia, take care of yourself. Also, if there's any danger, you must hide in the restaurant. That's the safest place in Chaos City. All right, Mia agreed. Meg nodded and turned to walk towards the door. Boss, you must come back safely. Mia took a step forward and looked at Meg's back. We're all waiting for you to come back. All right. Meg waved with a smile and left without looking back. Not long later, Angela pushed the door open and entered while rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked at the dazed Mia and curiously asked, I think I saw boss leave the shop when I went downstairs just now. What's he doing here? Then, her gaze was quickly attracted by the food box on the table. She opened the lid, and her eyes lit up when she saw the piping hot soup dumplings inside. Wow! Boss is here to give us warmth early in the morning. That's great. Smells so good. It's the smell of meat dumplings. Hannah followed her in, and her eyes lit up as well. She quickly went forward. Meg returned to the restaurant, and sent the two children to the magic potion shop. Julian was no longer in the potion shop. According to Cece, he had already left yesterday to go with Crassus. Meg squatted down, and looked at Amy, whose eyes were red, as he said, "Be good. Daddy will be back soon. You can go and play with your friends when you're bored, but you must come home on time." Amy is very brave. I won't cry. Amy nodded. Meow. Ugly Duckling jumped down from Amy's arms, and rubbed its head against Meg's hand. Good girl. Meg hugged Amy with a smile, and then got up to hug Anne. Meg looked at Cece, and said, "Then, I'll have to trouble you." "Don't worry. I'll take good care of them." Cece hugged the two children, and nodded with a smile. Chapter 21:59. As the Roth Empire headed north, the weather became colder and colder. The ice and snow showed no signs of melting, and the mountains and rivers were all white. A mountain range ran through the northern border, blocking the cold from the ice plains of the extreme north, and leaving behind an environment suitable for humans to live in. This mountain range that stretched for hundreds of miles was called the Gus Mountain Range. It ran from east to west like a natural moat, protecting the northern border of the Roth Empire. After crossing the Gus Mountain Range, it was the ice plains that never melted. The ice layer could reach up to 1,000 meters thick. It was said that if one kept going north, they would enter the land of eternal night. No one knew what was buried there. This ice plains of the extreme north was a forbidden zone for all living creatures. The bone-chilling cold would quickly take away one's body temperature. Even if one did not move, one's energy would be depleted quickly. Even the snow rabbits and snow foxes that were commonly seen in the northern border were hard to find on the ice plains. The Gus Mountain Range blocked the cold wind and also isolated the existence of life. However, at this moment, on the side of the Gus Mountain Range that was close to the ice plains, there was a team of 1,000 engineers working under a cliff. The cliff on the side of the ice plains was covered with a thick layer of ice. Under the grinding of the cold wind, it was as smooth as a mirror. The cliff was hundreds of meters high, and was a purely natural city wall. However, it was a mountain range, after all. There would always be gaps of various sizes in between. The elites of the various armies of the Roth Empire were gathering in the northern border, while the engineers of the northern border army had been deployed to the Gus Mountain Range 3 days ago to build fortifications. The Gus Mountain Range was the only choice to stop the undead army from going south. The ice plains of the extreme north were vast, and the weather was extreme. It was unrealistic to take the initiative to search for the undead army in the vast ice plains. After passing the Gus Mountain Range, there would be no more natural barriers that could stop the undead army. Using the natural barriers of the Gus Mountain Range to build fortifications, the entire mountain range would become a great wall that could stop the undead army from going south. The final battle would take place outside the Empire's borders. This was the policy set by the Allied Army's commander, Lord Alex, and Marshal Dominic. None of the warriors of the Roth Empire would question their decision. Move faster. We will fill up these few holes today, and then spread glutinous rice over this area. We will roast meat for you tonight. The brothers on sentry duty just caught a few snow deer, a tall and fat knight said loudly to the engineers who were working. All right. Hearing that there would be meat to eat at night, the eyes of the engineers who were carrying the ice cubes immediately lit up, and they worked much faster. This was a gap that was more than 10 meters wide. From this gap, there was a slope covered by a layer of ice. For ordinary people, it was still an insurmountable moat. However, according to the report of the scouts who entered the ice field, the skeletons could easily climb up any slope, let alone a gentle slope like this. Therefore, they had to use the ice extracted from the ice field to block the gap and connect it with the vertical cliffs on both sides to form a complete wall. This was also what the tens of thousands of engineers working under the Gus mountain range were doing. Of course, it would take at least 10 days to half a month for these engineers to fill in the gap. Fortunately, there were more than 10 mages in their team. The wind mages were responsible for cutting the ice, while the water mages poured water into the cracks in the ice. After the ice solidified, it became a solid ice wall. The ice mages were like fish in water in such an icy environment. Their ice-making speed was extremely fast, and they took on a large part of the workload. Sir, we have filled a few big holes in a row. How much more do we need to fill? An engineer asked the tall and fat leader as he threw down a large piece of ice. Yeah, it's too cold. Moving ice cubes every day, my hands are frozen stiff. The other engineers also turned their heads to look at him. It was fine if they were tired these days, but this side of the mountain was not as cold as the other side of the mountain. They were used to staying in the north, and they were also unbearably cold. At night, they huddled together before the fire to barely sleep. Last night, a soldier came out of the tent to pee and fell. When he was found in the morning, he had already turned into a popsicle. How much? The tall and fat soldier smiled. Suddenly, his expression turned cold. He looked at the engineers and said, "Until you fill it up. If you don't get the order to retreat, you have to keep filling it up. Are you afraid just because it's a little cold?" The brothers who are going to the front line to fight against the undead are going to have their heads tied to their belts. Remember, although we have never fought a war in the north, you are still soldiers. If the undead army crosses the Gus mountain range, your families will die at the hands of those devils. All the engineers lowered their heads in shame. The engineer who asked the question earlier quietly picked up a large piece of ice and walked toward the ice wall. The engineers worked in silence. Their legs were even faster than before. On the mountain, Dominic, who was wearing armor, nodded slightly. He withdrew his gaze and looked at the adjutant beside him. "Tell the engineers to hurry up and send them to the front line. Prioritize the supply of food. The front line must be set up according to the requirements within 3 days." "Yes, Marshal." The adjutant nodded. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Marshal, there is another small matter that I would like to report to you." "Speak." "A frost dragon appeared on the front line yesterday. She helped the army repair more than 10 gaps, but she has been asking about the undead army," the adjutant said. "Could it be her?" Dominic frowned. "Where is she now?" "I don't know if she has left." "I will go and ask now," the adjutant quickly said and left quickly. Not long later, the adjutant returned. He looked at Dominic and said, "Marshal, she has left. I heard she flew toward the ice plains." "She entered the ice plains." Dominic's face darkened. The Roth Empire had lost many spies in the ice plains. Whether it was the extremely dangerous environment or the skeletons hidden under the snow, they were all extremely dangerous existences. "Get ready. I am going to write a letter to the dragons," Dominic said. "Yes. If the million-strong undead army is a flood, then the 100-mile mountain range is the first line of defense. However, it is impossible to block the flood. Such a strong surge will definitely overturn the flood and cause it to be uncontrollable. Therefore, I have left 3 spillways. These 3 spillways are 3 natural canyons that are 10 to 15 kilometers long. Then, at the end of the spillway, I will pull up the last sluice to ensure that not a single drop of water will escape. Meg sat on the griffin's back and looked down at the vast world of ice and snow below. The Gus mountain range was like a huge flood, blocking the cold air that was trying to go south. What if we can't stop it? Irina asked. There are no ifs. Meg shook his head. With a deep gaze, he said, we can only guarantee that no accidents will happen. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.